These logs are from Senior Technical Operations Specialist 3KZ, Akpala's private files. These files have been compiled using an offline text software built by KZ Akpala. These files are conjecture and only reflect the opinions and biased insight from STO3, Akpala's perspective. All names, personally identifying details, and some elements of the stated findings have been altered to protect national security interests. Months and specific days have also been altered. Years have been entirely redacted. Entry 1 March 19th, 20XX. Okay, so I'm not sure how legal it is to journal about this, but oh my god. I'm on site at, I guess we can call it Central Lab 47B. A lifetime's worth of work to be here has finally paid off, and I didn't even know this place existed until 3 months ago. Though, I guess the previous 5 years of prep should have given me an idea that something like this would exist. Still, I don't think 50 years could have fully prepared me for what I'm helping to support. It's funny. So many times, I've questioned if my sacrifices were worth it to be in a place like this. Deep down, the answer had always been a resounding no. I was driven forward more by the desire to see what was on the other side. But now, it's almost laughable that that was ever a question in my mind. Anyways, my team seems competent enough. Morrison, our laboratory's leading director, has been involved with projects like this for the past 3 decades. And hey, if a guy could keep operations like this running with Stone Age tech, then who am I to question his methods? On top of that, he's a great guy to work around. It's always helpful when a good director is the type of guy you'd have a beer with. Despite the work, the lab is a pleasant place. People freely crack jokes, talk about family on the outside, and reference memes from our not-so-loud servers that connect us to the outside. I can't wait to see everything this place has in store for us. I'm certain we will accomplish great things. Entry 2 July 4th, 20XX. Happy 4th. To who cares? It goes without saying that in this line of work, federal holidays mean all jack and shitache here. The project takes precedence over all manner of holidays, leaves of absence, or workers' rights. Try suing the federal government over a top secret project because you didn't get enough minutes for your lunch break. Anyway, coincidentally, Morrison is a big 4th of July guy. He assured us that riding our asses for the past 3 months was only so that we could get this one day off and have an authentic American barbecue. How nice. Though, I'd argue sleep deprivation isn't worth underseasoned burgers and overcooked ribs. Just my opinion. Still, it was fun. Plus, it gave me time to come back to my journal and get to know some of my coworkers, while also trying to figure out what exactly is going on here. Despite my top secret clearance, I'm still not privy to everything behind the scenes. As far as I know, no one is. I maintain operational and research needs, but I'm only really aware of the needs, not all that they support. That's where the rumor mill comes in. While here, I became close friends with managing senior engineer Abed Abadi. Seeing as Abed is involved with the research, after a couple of beers and a very manly conversation about how much he misses his wife, I'd pop the question, just what are we doing here? To my surprise, he wasn't exactly sure either. From what I could gather, his team is responsible for cell cultivation engineering needs. But more than that, supposedly, the groups of cells he's looking at are entirely unique to any previously studied genome, including within federal databases. As I understand it, the main goal is to keep them alive with the side project of understanding what stimuli can harm the cells, and how they respond. Seriously, just what are we looking at? Entry 3 October 24th, 20XX. My manager just died. I don't think anyone was going to tell us. Morrison tried to sell the team on her leaving the facility due to a personal matter, but it sounded like crap from the beginning. More so when I heard a couple of the higher-ups specifically mention her death in passing while working one of my later nights. Guess classifying information doesn't hold up to human error. My coworker Mia has 2 theories on why. Either it's to keep us productive by preventing us from getting distracted by the news of her death, or it's because death isn't an uncommon thing here, taking a shot of whiskey on it being the former. Still, it feels wrong to continue our work as if nothing happened. I didn't always get along with Wendy, but I think her death at least deserves to be acknowledged. Everyone deserves a moment of silence. This brings into question other reassignments or leaves of absence. If I die, will the same thing happen to me? Entry for February 13th, 20XX+1. They're making me manager. Going to be a short post as I apparently have a party to attend. Abed and Mia found it fit to put together something to celebrate my promotion. Somehow, they got high-quality peppermint schnapps into the facility. I'm excited, but simultaneously, I can't shake the ghost of Wendy from my mind. Part of me feels guilty for taking her position. Another part tells me this is what my entire life has been leading up to. I guess we'll see. Entry 5 March 8th, 20XX+1. Quick post. Things have been going great. Abed somehow smuggled cigars for a movie night with Mia and some of our coworkers. I swear that guy has some crazy connections. Something to look into. I'm not a smoker, but when in Rome. Also, why does his room have a pool table? I didn't even know that was an option. Gotta thank the taxpayers for that one. I can envision myself here with these people for a really long time. Might even leave with some lifelong friends. Entry 6 April 19th, 20XX+1. They're finally letting me see it. I was informed yesterday that they're allowing me to see the specimen on which all this has been based. I suppose I impressed whoever is above us in my 2 months of management. Operational support is running as smoothly as ever in my short stint. Or maybe this had always been the plan for me. Regardless, it almost feels like a dream. However, per the standard unnecessarily cryptic governmental practices, I'm not allowed to know when I can see it, or apparently do anything that shows an unusual level of anticipation. Whatever that means, I'll update later. Entry 7 May 8th, 20XX+1. I don't fully know how to describe what I'm feeling right now. I can't fully remember if I was driven to a different location or walked somewhere within Central Lab 47B. All I can remember is being injected with something, having a bag placed over my head, and then coming into consciousness in a lab. At the center of a hodgepodge of wiring, tubes, and screens was a large tank. Within it was what looked like a pale amorphous blob. The closest thing I could compare it to was an octopus with large, buggy eyes. Where a normal cephalopod would have a beak, a sizable gelatinous sac was present, from which 2 snail-like stalks would occasionally expand and contract. At the end of each tentacle were flexible digits that tirelessly explored their transparent prison. Intermittently, it'd flash brilliant colors. An electronic cadence would sometimes follow, and an iridescent skin flap with tiny intricate patterns would extend from its cranium. I imagined it was as if it were showing off extra neurons, almost like a display of its intelligence. But then again, how smart is a creature that was in the state it was in? Noticeably, a significant amount of gray slime seemed to have accumulated at the bottom of its tank. It didn't look like a lifeless mucus, but more like fungus or a slime mold. It would spit these rigid structures from its stalks that would quickly find their way to the tank's edges before disintegrating and settling at the bottom. Supposedly, these would build up and routinely need cleaning, but they were fascinating nonetheless. As I sat there observing, Morrison was beside me. Given his position, I assumed he'd seen this thing countless times, and even still, he appeared spellbound by the specimen. It was almost as if he was in a trance. But how could I blame him? What we were observing was fascinating, something entirely new for our species. Before I knew it, I was rushed out and debriefed on the situation. It was found in the depths of our oceans, so they say. Apparently, scientists using an unmanned drone caught another one of its kind, giving birth to the creature we have here. Or rather, it gave birth to a lot of eggs, and this is one of the few that survived. The parent was caught later on. After various forms of genetic analysis on top of other tests, the original research team discovered that it contained a very minuscule genetic relation to any known animal on Earth. And even then, it would suggest a very basic shared genetic connection that predates the formation of our planet. That's when the federal government stepped in. Still, all this effort over the identification of animal. I wish I was naive enough to believe there wasn't much more to what they found. Entry 8 June 29th, 20XX+1. There's a weird vibe in the lab lately. What was once a place of passionate folks who were all too happy to have a conversation has turned surprisingly cold. I don't really get it. We're all stuck here together, isolated from the rest of the world. Leaning on each other was the only thing keeping us sane, and now people kinda keep their heads down. It's throwing me off. Also, there's a strange smell now. I don't know if anyone has picked up on it yet, but I catch whiffs of it occasionally. I'm going to do my best to stay in my room when I don't have to be in the office. Maybe the cleaning crew has been slacking on clearing out the vents. Entry 9 July 5th. 20XX+1. We didn't get a 4th of July party this year, though it feels like we've all been working harder now than ever. Morrison actually yelled at a guy today. I didn't know he had that in him. He's always been so even-keeled. I've seen some guys mess up pretty badly in the past, and his first reaction has always been, "It's okay. How can we do better next time?" I feel bad. I mean, he really tore into the poor bastard. Thankfully, Abad and Mia seem to be okay from all of this. Abad's been busier as research needs have ramped up, but I was able to talk to Mia alone for a bit. She brought up similar concerns in addition to the fact that, supposedly, the lab is looking to divert funds, resources, and personnel from other wings into research. According to Mia, due to unforeseen circumstances regarding crucial people in other non-essential departments, the lab no longer sees it fit to waste resources maintaining them. Janitorial services have been majorly reduced. Our human resources department is gone. Employee enrichment services are gone. Our accounting department has been reduced, and all research on how these cells can apply to modern medicine has been scrapped. All this, among other things. What the hell is happening? The smell is getting worse, by the way. Entry 10 August 21st, 20XX+1. I didn't know who to ask about leaving, so I discussed it with someone on Morrison's team. I didn't want to go to him directly. He's been scary lately. What they told me was that because of the contract I signed and because of the things I had seen, I absolutely had to stay the remainder of my agreed upon term, be fully debriefed by an HR representative, and have multiple meetings with multiple councils and unnamed people to discuss my findings, and wait for an accounting executive to perform an audit to ensure I wasn't lying about my use of government property or finances. I'm also subject to a personal investigation of an unspecified period. Alternatively, I could attempt to breach my contract and be thrown in federal prison, or worse. Effectively, I was screwed. I figured I'd vent with Abed over a bottle of whiskey, but he's been unresponsive to my messages, and I haven't seen him around the lab. I decided to see what Mia was doing when I came across a disturbing sight. What looked like some sort of mold was staining the lab walls. Not overly so, but enough to where it was hard to walk by without noticing patches of it, most notably around the vents. I mentioned this to one of the few janitorial staff members, and he told me it was normal. Apparently, it had shown up relatively recently. When they looked into it, they found it wasn't mold, so it was probably harmless. Maybe staining from damaged pipes. Either way, he promised to look into it, but I don't have much faith there. When I finally reached Mia's room, she told me she was feeling sick and couldn't talk. Come to think of it, I've also been pretty under the weather. I'm starting to get hot flashes completing this entry, so I guess I'll end this here. I'll take the excuse to watch horror shows and pass out for 12 hours. Entry 11 November 2nd, 20XX+1. Morrison got into a fight. Per usual, he was berating a researcher over his findings regarding cell cultivation and the ideal temperature to maintain one of the eggs we had in storage. Apparently, the results weren't good enough. Mind you, we don't know anything about this animal. We're starting from scratch here and performing miracles to keep this thing and its siblings alive, much less routinely finding the absolute best conditions for it. To make a long story short, Morrison actually ended up trying to strangle the man. For an older guy, he's surprisingly strong. It took 5 men to pry Morrison off. The guy he attacked had to go to the on-site infirmary. Afterward, everyone kept on like everything was normal. I had to get that out of the way before returning to my last update. So I got really sick, like bedbound for a solid month. I'm just now getting back to work in the lab. I've had to run everything from my computer. Painful as it was for me, being sick isn't the interesting bit. It's what was coming out of my body. At first, I was expelling your run-of-the-mill throw-up. Greenish-brown gross stuff. You get my drift. But in the 3rd week, it was grayish-black. Not only that, but in the unfortunate event I couldn't make it to my bathroom, I'd often see what looked like tiny maggots crawling from the bile and escaping into who knows where. Mia had a similar experience when I talked to her about it. The funny thing is, I can't remember anyone else getting sick like this. Maybe they had and didn't talk about it. I don't know. Luckily, my absence wasn't missed. People kind of just filled the gap without much thought. And when I came back, it was a seamless fit. I wish the rest of the government ran this smoothly. Entry 12 December 25th, 20XX+1. The mold on the walls has grown significantly and large patches of the stuff have overtaken much of the lab. In any other circumstance, we'd get put on quarantine, but people keep working as if nothing is happening. I don't know if this bit is in my head, but it also feels like people's skin is starting to reflect the color of the pulsating moldy walls. Morrison especially looks gray and puffy. He's also sweating a lot as of late. They all are. Despite this, productivity has never been better. No one talks about anything other than the project. Everyone comes early, stays late, and only eats what's needed to keep them functional, though everyone else still keeps gaining weight somehow. We've made massive breakthroughs in cell cultivation and have hatched some of the eggs we had in cryo. Apparently, the new specimens look different than the one I saw. Not sure how. One of my coworkers came up to me today to ask me for the status of some reports. The smell was unbearable. The skin on the fatty tissue that had accumulated on what was once a slender neck was peeling badly. The yellowing of his eyes had reached a point where they were nearly amber, and thick veins on his hands writhed as if something was using them to move around his body. And he was just one case. Everyone has taken on a somewhat mutated version of what they once were. I keep my distance from all of them. I still can't get a hold of a bed, though I thought I heard someone mention his name with the word spawn. Mia is the only other person here that seems normal. Who knows for how long? Entry 13 March 9th, 20XX+2. I've been plotting with Mia on how we can escape. Things are so deeply wrong here. The goal was to understand this thing, sequence its DNA, and determine if it has any benefits to humans. Now they're talking about producing more. They want more eggs and more tanks. Morrison is trying to see if other labs would be willing to host multiple specimens. He's even been so bold as to suggest they go to an aquarium or two and pass it off as a new species. Why would we do any of that? The worst part is no one here has any objection. Everyone is united on the goal of the project, which, to my knowledge, has shifted dramatically since my first day here. Mia and I wanted to see if we could save any of this and go public. No good. All the data is heavily encrypted and would auto-delete on any attempt to copy it to another device. We looked into various methods of saving information. Still, I don't need to tell you the government has serious security protocols that the general public isn't aware of, and it may not be for another decade. As you'd expect, no phones or cameras are allowed within miles of this place. The only thing I have is my logs, which I've opted to transcribe into a notebook and reassemble later. Because of our respective statuses within the lab, we have access to specific databases, and it was in one of those we found that a bed was dead. His body was found in his room. Slimy spores had taken root in his brain matter, grown through his skull, attached themselves to the wall, and crawled up to the vents. The accompanying pictures were gruesome. What's worse, he wasn't the only one. So many of our coworkers had met a similar fate. And the bastards here, they were tracking everything, thoroughly documenting the growths, measuring the stalks, taking samples, and trying to grow them in a lab. Worst of all, we may have found evidence to suggest that this all ties back to the creature we found. But why weren't Mia and I affected like the others? Or maybe a better question is, how many others are out there? Entry 14 April 13th, 20XX+2. The good news is we've managed to track down other survivors from other parts of the lab. All of them described getting sick, just as Mia and I had. The bad news is they're too far from where Mia and I are to safely meet consistently. The others here seem to have lost all sense of uniqueness. It's almost like they move as one. Sometimes, they don't even need to use words to delegate or accept tasks. Any actions not in support of project goals are met with aggression. The only time I feel safe is in the confines of my room. My candle stash also helps me forget the wafting aroma from the walls and desks. Anyways, from our efforts, we were down to a team of 5. Mia, myself, Cell Biology Director Liu Chen, Lead Engineering Specialist Sarah McCarthy, and Security Officer Cameron Reeves. We were able to establish an encrypted group chat. Though on government servers, nothing you do is really safe, so we didn't have the benefit of saving messages for more than a couple of hours at a time. That being said, we were still able to come up with a plan. From our collective knowledge, we learned that Morrison and the other directors were attempting to contact another lab to give them one of our hatch specimens. They'd be taking a convoy out at some point with a team of engineers and scientists who would train the lab on best practices along with a debrief of our findings. This would likely be our best time to move. Not only would the lab have fewer personnel to stop us, but our coworkers' uniform thinking would probably mean they'd be too focused on ensuring this transport goes smoothly than worrying about a few people slipping out. Unfortunately, Cameron didn't have the authority to get us in and out of whatever door we wanted. However, as lead engineer, Sarah was privileged to request access to certain lab areas for maintenance checks. Furthermore, Director Chen had the authority to approve such a request and could ask that Reeves be upgraded with the necessary clearances to most areas, including the exit. So the plan was simple. We'd wait until the convoy was planning to leave, rendezvous near the front, and walk out the door. Easy, except for the 60-mile trek from the lab to civilization, with armed security watching everyone who exits. That's where we'd have to get creative. Technically, due to our contract, no one is allowed to leave the area unless given special permission approved by multiple parties. We would never be given that approval. Luckily, directors are given their own tracked vehicles to travel between the different buildings. Maybe we can convince external security that we're escorting Chen for a debrief. If we're lucky, they should only scan Chen and Cameron's ID cards for approval. From there, we drive until we're out of shooting range, ditch the car, and hike back to civilization. After days of brainstorming, I'm disappointed this is what we came up with. We'll fine-tune as time goes on. Here's to not getting our brains eaten by spores. Entry 15 May 1st, 20XX+2. Everything became very real today. Chen was able to get a date for the convoy. It's closer than expected. In light of this, we decided to do our homework early. We'd try to get Reeves the approvals he needs first. Meanwhile, Sarah would do her best to slow down the security systems around the exit. She'd work with Reeves to time a mandatory system update and reset with our escape. Mia and I would direct staff towards complex and meaningless tasks. The goal ultimately was to keep everyone so preoccupied with busy work that they didn't notice us working behind the scenes, or unwittingly supporting some of the other plans we had in place. I've also been working extra to specifically slow down security resource needs and ensure that intensive project deadlines coincide with when we plan to escape. I don't know how on earth Cameron got access to these, but when I found an unmarked box at my door, I didn't know whether or not to open it. Only when he sent a message to the group saying, 3 shots, emergencies only, did the pit in my stomach grow from a seed to a redwood. Inside was a small, foldable gun about the size of a credit card. 3 rounds of ammunition were stored in a tiny compartment on the weapon. Even staring at it now, I'm getting chills. Entry 16 June 3rd, 20XX+2. We're biding our time now. We're putting some finishing touches on our plan and waiting. Good thing, too. The mold has wholly overtaken the lab and attached to our electronics. It almost feels like it's breathing. Even if I'm immune to whatever this stuff is now, it surely can't be good to live in it every day. I saw Morrison for the first time in a while. His eyes were gelatinous sacs with parasites pulsating in the fluid. At first, I assumed the parasites completely blinded him, but from how he was watching us all, I felt that couldn't be further from the truth. Every time one of us would move from our desk, one of his bulbous eyes would track us until something more interesting caught his attention. Say, for example, another fight breaking out in the lab. Fights were common now. Whenever someone was deemed to be slacking or actively detrimental to the good of the project, people would take it upon themselves to rectify the situation physically. It's not uncommon for this retribution to go too far. I'm not sure where the bodies of those killed by the angry mobs go, but I have a hunch. Here's the thing. Approval to be here is a long and arduous process. You would assume that every person, even if they're slacking a bit, is too important to lose. Oddly enough, that hasn't been the case. I've seen people literally have their limbs torn off in a fit of mob rage, only for someone completely new or, on occasion, the same person sitting in that same chair no more than 24 hours later. This is going to sound crazy, but are they somehow fixing the people they've killed? Or are they birthing them? I'm starting to wish we had more than an escape plan. This whole place needs to go up in flames. Entry 17 July 14th, 20XX plus 2. It's hard to describe the feeling of isolation I have here. My days are spent planning, pretending to support something I've grown to hate, and attempting to keep any semblance of the mold that has turned my coworkers into an autonomous hive mind out of my room. Every day, I look at the gun camera and found for us, and I wonder if the only true freedom is sitting on my desk. I imagine the others feel the same. How could they not? That being said, I'm no coward. Even if I were, I'm too prideful to let the others on the outside turn my body into a puppet for the mold. But still, is this something I'll ever be free of? I haven't left this place in over 2 years. I've been effectively cut off from the outside world. I don't know how things have changed. Maybe there's some other societal parasite that's even worse than what's here. Have people grown to hate each other more? Is disease rampant? While I appreciate the shifts in culture, there's so much that changes so fast that I fear I'll go from one isolated world to another, though the one out there has pho, jerk chicken, and whiskey, so I guess I couldn't be too mad. I never thought I'd reach the point where pho, jerk chicken, and whiskey are 3/4 of why I choose to stay alive. Funny how life gets boiled down to the simplest things in the most dire moments, but I mean it. I really do. Plus, I can always go crazy after my stomach is full. It might be a while before the next update. The date is rapidly approaching. I won't be able to write anything during all of this. I'm going to use the remaining time to prepare. If you don't see another update, then, yeah. To whoever is reading this, me, my future wife and kids, whoever, regardless of what happens, know that I tried, okay? I really did. Entry 18 September 20XX plus 3. It's been a while, over a year now. I'm going to be honest, a large part of me didn't want to come back to this. The whole ordeal felt and still feels like a nightmare, or maybe a severe case of psychosis. Either way, I found myself feeling incredibly guilty for ignoring what happened. And it's not like I can share government secrets with my therapist, so here I am. I suppose I'll start with the day of the convoy leaving. So much planning and preparation had gone into that day. As expected, the focus of the entire lab was moving the specimen to another location. Morrison and some other directors were to be part of the move. Chen and the remaining leadership would hang back and run operations in their absence. This was good for us. As planned, Sarah was able to get the exit doors maintenance request approved. Thanks to the damage she had done in the previous months, Chen had gotten Reeves the proper approvals to escort her to the exit. In real time, it would have seemed suspicious for Sarah to fix the doors herself, but as managers of our respective teams, all it took was a slightly heated conversation about how I needed her team back at the cell rejuvenation bay, and that she could handle the simple task of the doors by herself. An order backed by Director Chen in person, Mia had a more difficult time moving around. Still, when I came around and informed everyone that I'd need about an hour of her time to discuss meeting operational goals, we were all there. There was a slight hiccup when one of the replaced employees wouldn't leave. These guys were usually obsessed with working, so I wasn't sure why he needed to hang around and watch us. The answer came when he walked over. His face was all too familiar. A bed, or some twisted version of him. I think he knew what we were up to, and he easily could have ratted us out. Part of me wanted to reach out and tell him to come with us to safety. My anger and hatred for this place wouldn't allow me to leave someone that I had grown so close to. How could I? Cameron, however, had different plans. He rushed a bed's clone, clasped his hand around his face, and brought the credit card-sized gun to his temple. I couldn't hear too well, but I could make out the undeniable words of a very strong threat. I wanted so badly to rip Cameron off of a bed and punch his teeth in for attacking my friend. For a moment, I even took a step forward. Luckily, my rational mind kicked in when I caught those amber eyes and realized my friend was gone. This was only an abominable imitation of the man I knew. After the scuffle, the two got up. The Abed clone looked at Mia and I and promptly left. Hopefully, by the time he'd informed the others. If he informed the others, we'd be long gone. In all honesty, outside of that, things went pretty smoothly with the security system out, and the ever-present maggot-filled eyes of the other directors not on us at all times. The lab being relatively empty for the first time allowed us to get the doors open and slip out into the entrance hall without being noticed. It's when we got outside. God, I'm still not past what we saw. It's a big reason why I never wanted to come back to this. There wasn't security outside. In fact, I bet security hadn't been outside in months. It was a fucking nest. An enormous, moldy nest had wholly overtaken the entrance hall. Thousands of those things in various stages of life were embedded in the nest with countless eggs. As we carefully walked by, almost in unison, they extended that sickening, iridescent skin flap on their heads. It was blinding. The final door to the outside was nearly molded over. Only a tiny crawl space was available to us. I remember we all just stared, not entirely sure what to do. Breaking the silence, I asked Chen where the car was. All he could do was return a blank expression. Mia tried the same while grabbing him by the shoulders. His only response was a faint, "I created this." Cameron started shaking violently, repeating no, as he sank into the ground. Immediately, a long tentacle grabbed him by the ankle, and he screamed. I spun towards him, but there was nothing I could do. A myriad of those creatures covered him in seconds. I panicked, grabbed Mia, shouted for everyone to leave, and rushed her toward the door. Sarah took a second but was close behind us. I quickly looked back and saw Chen still refusing to move. I shouted again, but once more, it fell on deaf ears. Ultimately, it'd be the last I'd ever see of him. I dove headfirst toward the opening. Tiny tentacles curiously latched onto me. Dread deeper than anything I had experienced before permeated my body, clawing at the hard ground in front of me until the tips of my fingers bled. I finally popped out of the other side with a primal scream. Behind me followed the distinct sound of 2 rounds going off and Mia crawling out of the dirt. Sarah followed with her arms extended. The things had gotten hold of her, and they wanted her badly. Mia and I each grabbed an arm and pulled with so much force I was worried we'd end up dislocating her shoulders. But that was nothing compared to becoming food for an army of hell spawns. With a final heave, we pulled her out of the tiny space. With her came one of the cephalopods that began squirming violently in the dirt. In a rage, Sarah ran over and stomped on the thing repeatedly until it was nothing but an unrecognizable stain on the ground, screaming all the while. She broke down after realizing the thing was dead. We got her to her feet and took one final look at what had become our prison over the past 2 years. The outside had decayed much faster than a building of its kind should. Intermittently, we'd see the creatures poke out into the sunlight only to recoil when the heat touched their skin. The last thing we'd heard before leaving for good was the undeniable sound of a gunshot. Climbing the gates was tedious but relatively easy. Our most significant challenge to date was the vast barren wasteland we had to traverse. Without Chen's car, there wasn't an easy answer outside the obvious. We had to keep walking until we hit a highway. Luckily, on my way out, I grabbed a compass and some first aid stuff and researched the nearest highway. I'll spare the details of what was a monotonous hike until we hit something. After a mind-numbing trek and waiting by the road, we eventually got picked up by someone passing by and were dropped off at a town about 40 minutes off the road. We had done it. With any luck, the federal government would consider us dead, and we wouldn't have to answer for breaching our contracts. I don't feel comfortable explaining what happened to Mia or Sarah. Their stories aren't mine to tell, but I do still keep up with both of them. As you'd expect, I had to essentially start my life over again. New identity, new location, new friends. Lying on my resume and keeping up those lies during interviews was challenging, but I'm in a decent spot now, financially. The nightmares have been brutal, though, and the very real possibility that my health is forever impacted by being around that thing scares me to this day. The doctors say they can't find anything wrong with me, but I've been getting sick more frequently, and I swear I can feel something tiny tickling the back of my throat in my sleep. Maybe I'm delusional. It's also tough not knowing what became of all of that. Did they ever make it to other labs? Are aquariums planning on debuting a new species? It bothers me. I wish I had the answers. Maybe someone listening to or reading this does and is just waiting to come forward. I know I'm not the first to experience something like this. Anyway, as I sit here with a half-empty bowl of pho and jerk chicken on the side, I've decided to go public. Well, somewhat. I'll absolutely be using an alias or a proxy account to post all of this, but these experiences need to be shared. I've done enough damage to contribute to hell on earth. Let's see if we can do some good by giving people a heads up about what's happening, right? The truth is going to come out sooner or later. Sorry, I've been rambling for a bit now, and honestly, there's another shot of whiskey calling my name. This will likely be the last entry for a long while, and that's a good thing. Cheers, and thank you for being here with me. The day my brother tried to force me to down cleaning detergent to avoid going on a school field trip should have set off alarm bells in my head. It wasn't a high-class trip abroad since our school prioritized its sports department over pretty much everything else. So, they decided the petting zoo was an ideal place to take 50 18-year-olds. I wasn't interested in animals or petting them. I couldn't afford the trip anyway. But somehow my mother had magically come up with the funds on the day of the trip, pressing a bright green envelope into my hand. Inside was my permission slip and 4 crisp $20 bills. Money that she couldn't afford to give me. We could barely afford to eat the night before, scrounging on microwave meals and expired convenience food, and somehow my mother had some real cash. I tried to give it back, but Mom was insistent on me joining my classmates and having a good time. At a petting zoo. Spooning stale cereal into my mouth, I was still frowning at the envelope of cash. How did she get it? Mom had lost her job. She had no family, and my father wanted nothing to do with us. We lost our house a year prior, and luckily had found a small apartment in the middle of the city. There were only 2 rooms and mold in the bathroom, noisy neighbors, and a resident rat under the floorboards. But it was home. It was better than being homeless. Anyway, Mom was unusually smiley that morning, pouring real squeezed orange juice in my glass. The proper kind that was like $10 a carton. I was used to plain water at breakfast, but for a moment, I reveled in the luxury of proper juice, gulping it down. It tasted good, tangy and fresh, flushing down my throat. Early morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, basking my mother in shadow. I could just see the thick wool of her robe, straggly blonde hair dangling in her face. Mom smelled like cheap raspberry shampoo and instant coffee. How did you afford all of this? I didn't just mean the juice. There were fresh rolls and Nutella in the refrigerator. Mom had filled my backpack with chips and cookies for the coach ride. She had real free-range eggs, packs of pasta and rice, and enough candy filling the cupboard to feed us for months. It's not like I was complaining. Neither was my brother, who was unusually quiet sitting across from me. Unlike me, he had piled his plate with waffles and cookies, a giant glass of chocolate milk in front of his plate. I continued spooning Cocoa Pops in my mouth since neither Mom nor my brother wanted to comment. Mom, I swiped at milk running down my chin. Since when do we buy fancy juice? Mom stopped flitting around the kitchen like a frenzied butterfly. I wanted to give you a nice breakfast. She planted a kiss on my head before placing the envelope of cash in front of me. I noticed she was shaking. Her fingers playing with my hair, pulling it into my usual ponytail, were trembling. Go with your friends and have fun. It's a petting zoo, I deadpanned. What's fun about a petting zoo? I caught my brother's eye across the table. He looked away quickly, but I still saw something flicker in his eyes, lips pressed into a line. Connor had always been loud at breakfast, picking arguments and singing to the radio. That morning, an imposter was sitting in his seat. This boy was pale and kept his head down. I wanted to talk to him, but every time I tried, it's like our mother was putting herself in front of us. My brother was always ready for school, often commenting on me being a slowpoke and fighting me for bathroom privileges. But this time he was still in his pajamas. No, Connor had slept in yesterday's clothes, a crumpled shirt and jeans. His eyes were shadowed with sleep circles. Had he even slept? He looked like he might speak before Mom dumped my backpack in my lap with a wide smile, and he went back to glaring down at his breakfast. You should hurry up, she hummed, maintaining a fake smile, pulling me to my feet. Both of us knew she was forcing it. Connor rolled his eyes, stuffing a waffle into his mouth, chewing mechanically. Mom ignored his glare. You don't want to miss the bus. Mom excused herself to go grab her bag, and I was left alone with my brother. When the door slammed, Connor downed his glass of chocolate milk before turning to me. His eyes were dark and confusing, a hollowness to them I didn't understand. I couldn't read his expression. He was supposed to be coming on the field trip too, but Mom could only afford for me. I didn't think he'd be this salty about it. There's dishwasher soap behind you, he grumbled, forking up waffles and stuffing them into his mouth. I don't think he was enjoying them. It almost looked like he was trying to gag himself. If I were you, I'd drink it. Connor's half-lidded eyes flicked to the door. He swallowed his food, which looked painful, washing it down with more chocolate milk. He didn't seem to notice it dribbling down his chin. Connor's eyes pierced right through mine, finding oblivion, his movements almost robotic. He gestured to the washing detergent sitting on the faucet, and something sickly twisted in my gut. Before, he burped loudly, covering his mouth. Connor seemed to come to life for a moment, eyes growing frenzied, his gaze flicking to the ceiling. I had never seen my brother look so desperate, and yet helpless. He didn't move. I knew he wanted to, but I wasn't sure he could, his body rocking back and forth. Before Mom comes back, I laughed, even when his words tangled my gut. Wow, I said, that stings. Connor's lip twitched. I'm deadly serious. What? I shouldered my backpack, settling my brother with a frown. Are you okay? His eyes didn't leave me even when he was draining his third glass of chocolate milk. Connor's cheeks were a pale, almost sickly green. He poured himself another helping of cereal. I'm great. I started forwards, and he flinched back, like I was diseased. Connor, I spoke softly. What's going on? Something seemed to snap inside my older brother's expression, his eyes narrowing. He straightened up, lips parting like he was going to speak. I should have known. When my brother's eyes filled with tears, his hands balling into fists, I should have questioned it. Myra, Mom was standing behind me, and she was wearing her forced smile again. You should get going, sweetie. I turned back to Connor, who slumped in his chair with a scoff. I'm fine, he grumbled. Go ahead, have fun. Instead of questioning my brother's strange behavior, I turned away from him and followed my mother out into the yard. I felt Connor's glare following me out of the door. I never saw that version of my brother again. Maybe that's a good thing though. If I ever do see my older brother again, the boy I left that day, who watched me walk away and didn't say a thing, I will blow the fucker's brains out. I was still thinking of my brother's words when I boarded the school coach a few hours later. Mom told me he was just tired, but I couldn't call that tired. I texted him with a question mark, but it didn't send. Did he block me? Ignoring my brother's weird behavior, I found a window seat and slumped down. The bus was nicer than normal, plush seats and velvet curtains. It reminded me of a night bus. I get motion sickness, so I corked in my music and closed my eyes. You're awfully quiet. We were maybe an hour into the journey when a familiar southern accent sliced through my music, and I twisted around in my seat, plucking an earphone out. Something wet pooled down my chin, and I swiped it away, horrified. I didn't usually drool when I was awake. The sound of my classmates' laughter and yelling hit me, and I resisted corking my earphone back in. I was sleeping, I told the seat behind me. Liar, I arched my neck. Why are you hiding? I'm not, he whispered. I'm keeping a low profile. Mate says I talk too much. You do talk too much, I said. Have you ever talked to you? He blew a raspberry. I'm offended. I couldn't resist a smile. I'm not talking to polka dot seats. Show yourself, or I'm going back to drowning my sorrows. Wait, what? Taz Eaton poked his head through the gap in my seat. I could just glimpse his sandy-colored hair, sleepy eyes regarding me with bemusement. Taz and I had known each other from way back, since our mothers were friends, and we were forced together through playdates. I vaguely remember not even being self-aware yet, and this other kid was always at my house, who picked at his nose and stole my toys. As we grew older, our friendship became natural. I was 12 when I stopped seeing Taz as a gross disease. When his hair grew out, and he lost his baby fat, I started to avoid him in class, trying to hide burning cheeks and an unsettled stomach. But he was yet to get the memo. Taz was my usual seatmate on class field trips, but that particular coach ride had a strict seating plan, which meant we couldn't sit at the back and throw peanuts at other kids like usual. Luckily, Lily Myers had the flu, so I had the luxury of a seat to myself. Drowning your sorrows. He inclined his head. It's 11 in the morning. Metaphorically, I corrected him. I lowered my voice. How is sharing a seat with a psychopath? Taz's seatmate was Nathan Colley, who had spent half of the coach ride kicking my seat and arguing with the teacher. I could just about see the boy leaning over the back of his seat, yelling with his equally annoying friends. Taz's lip curled. I'd give it a 0 out of 10. That's generous. Save me. Taz whispered through the gap, his voice a mocking whine. He's so loud. He's driving me crazy. I settled him with a smile. You should be sitting with me. His lips split into a grin. I liked it when he smiled like that. I remember my teenage hormones held me hostage over this boy's smile, the dimples in his cheeks. Taz made my chest kind of ache. Hey, it's not like I had a choice. I turned back to my window, avoiding being caught in Nate's wrath. He was already screaming at kids who had the guts to tell him to shut up. The last thing I wanted was to be caught in the crossfire. Outside, I could have sworn we had driven past the same sign. I leaned my head against the window, something wet and warm seeping down my chin. Drool. I swiped at my mouth with my sleeve. Again, can you ask to move seats? I asked Taz, keeping my gaze glued to the window. Maybe I was dehydrated. I had a bottle of water, but it was at the front of the bus. The teacher had taken our bags to avoid us snacking on candy and throwing up everywhere, which was fair. I didn't go on our last field trip, but it had been infamously remembered for multiple kids getting sick on the bus. I already did, Taz groaned. His reply was a little bit delayed. I shook my head, swiping at more drool. I could feel it now, bleeding from the corners of my mouth. Maybe I was getting sick. This time Taz kicked my seat, and I jumped. He stuck his head through the gap. According to Mrs. Jensen, I have to have a serious health problem if I want to move seats, and even then, I'll just be moved to the back. Which means unless I'm dying of fucking rabies, I'm stuck here with him. I found myself laughing, a hysterical giggle slipping from my lips. Rhymes with Blinn. What's so funny? I could hear the smile in his voice. You think rabies is something to laugh about, Mar? I laughed at that too, sorta. The word rolled off of my tongue. Rabies? I thought dizzily, my thoughts cotton candy. I covered my mouth. Wasn't drooling a main symptom of rabies? Taz. I didn't realize I was slurring until I heard my own voice, which sounded a million miles away, caught in a tunnel. Yeah. My head hit the back of my seat, and suddenly my eyes were far too heavy, flickering. Outside, I saw the same sign we had driven past, which meant we hadn't even left our town. I opened my mouth to tell him, but I was already speaking, my voice a tangled giggle. I didn't mean to laugh, but everything was just funny. The sign outside that we kept driving past, and my own hands in front of me. The world around me was slowing down. Even my own voice, my brain, my breaths coming out in sharp pants. Are you drooling? Taz's voice sounded kind of weird, like drooling. Yeah, I laughed again, but my body wouldn't move. I blinked, and a figure was looming over me. For a disorienting moment through tunnel vision, the shadow had my brother's face. Connor's hollow eyes stared down at me, lips parting into a silent cry. He was clad in dark clothing, a heavy-looking weapon strapped to his side. Mara. He shook me, and my head bounced side to side. I liked the movement, the bounce of my brain jumping in my skull. Go. His voice felt real, his breath in my face. Connor prodded me when I was falling, my eyes flickering again. Mara, I need you to listen to me, he whispered. Can you move? When I tried to speak, only gibberish came out. He shook me again. Can you run? I couldn't. Time came to a confusing halt, and I was trapped in a single second. The moment another towering figure came over and stuck a gun in the back of my brother's head, I realized I couldn't feel fear. I was numb. What did I say about expressing emotion? His voice sounded funny, like he had inhaled helium. Connor straightened up. I was making sure she was inebriated, sir. Agent Mac ordered me to make sure my sister is out cold. The shadow blurred before disappearing. I could still hear his voice long after he'd left, his barking command still rattling in my skull. You may continue. Express emotion and face deactivation and execution. Are we clear? I could no longer hear my classmates. I couldn't hear Taz or Nate. They were just my own strangled breaths as the shadow with no face, and then my brother's face, pressed something plastic over my mouth and nose. I tried to shake it off, stern hands holding my head in place. I didn't speak properly until my face was lodged against the window, my vision blurring in and out of reality. I don't know why, but my response to Taz was still tangled on my tongue, trying to slip through my numb lips. Drooling. I told my brother still standing over me, muffling into harsh plastic suffocating my breath. Drooling. The word stuck to my brain, and I danced for a while. I didn't fall. I don't think the purpose was to make us sleep, or maybe it was, and my brain was just refusing. I just felt really high, like the time I tried weed with Taz, the two of us failing to inhale, and then dumping it. My body swayed back and forth, but it was like dancing. At some point, the bus stopped. The windows turned pitch dark, and behind me, Taz kicked my seat again. Wait, what's going on? His voice was a slow slur. What are you doing? He kicked my seat again, and my head jolted, almost bringing me back to life, but not quite. Hey, his cry grew stronger, this time his hands and feet battering the back of my seat. "Hey, get off of me, get off." When his cries turned to muffled whimpers, I closed my eyes, sleep finally coming to drag me away. It was delayed, my body already limp, my head uncomfortably resting on my shoulder. I could still sense my brother keeping guard, a whole swarm of shadows standing up and down the bus. I thought I was hallucinating when Connor let out a harsh laugh, crossed with a sob. "You fucking idiot." I woke up, being shoved off of the bus and straight into dirt. Barely conscious, my vision was one big confusing blur before rough hands were grasping hold of my shoulders and pulling me to unsteady feet. I went back to sleep, but my body was carried and dragged while my head bounced up and down. When I was fully awake, I was sitting in a large room, my arms chained to a desk. There was something stuck to my ear. It felt like an AirPod, but this thing was glued to me. There was a tall man who smelled like Axe spray flitting from desk to desk, prodding the devices attached to us. I started to ask what was happening, but my mouth tasted metallic, and I threw up instead. The chains would only let me go so far, so I was hanging off of my seat, heaving up orange juice that stung my throat, dribbling down my lips and chin. I remember lifting my head, my mouth still filled with mushy bile. The sun was rising in a pretty blue sky. The windows were filthy, but the world had not stopped. It was still going on out there, normal workdays and school days beginning. I thought it was the end of the world. I thought I had been brought to a shelter to avoid fallout. I should have been out there with my mom and brother getting ready for school. So why was I trapped inside a room with my hands chained down? Where was my mother? Twisting around in my chair, I searched for Taz, but the ghostly faces that stared back were strangers. "Sit up." The voice cut into the eerie silence. I did, sitting as if I was in class. "Congratulations." An announcement came from above. It was mechanical and in human text-to-speech. "You have been chosen to participate in." The voice was drowned out, suddenly, by a screech in my ears. No, not my ears. It was directly inside my skull, a rooted thing creeping its way into my mind. I remember screaming, my cry joining the cacophony around me. I slammed my head into the desk when I couldn't press my hands over my ears, resorting to knocking myself out. I could taste metal in the back of my throat, and glued to my teeth, sticky on my tongue. It wouldn't stop. I slammed my head into the desk again, and again, and again. Behind me, a boy dropped to the ground, pooling crimson seeping around his head. Was I going to end up like that? It wouldn't stop. It wouldn't fucking stop. Above me, blinding lights flickered. I watched them, dazedly, blood spilling from my lips. I remember my head hit the desk, and it was still there, still leaching inside of me. It was going to fucking kill me. It wouldn't stop. Next to me, a girl was trying to pry her earpieces off by dragging her head against the wood of her desk. I tried to copy her, but the thing only grew louder, a shrill, intense wail in my skull, until my head was tipped back, my eyes squeezed shut. I was begging, my tears felt thicker, salty blood on my lips. It was never going to fucking. Class 7B were considered St. Clair High School royalty. We were the smart kids, the ones with connections. I used these kids for my own benefit. Scarlett Janice was the daughter of the head of the school board. I was already in talks with her mother about tutoring. Kyan Hardy, the son of a Korean diplomat, was one of my best friends. I was invited to his family's get-together in the Hamptons, and was planning on having a chat with his father about my privilege being Kyan's best friend. Kyan's dad was known for making people disappear, and by disappear, I mean drop off of the face of the planet, and then be found in pieces, stuffed into a suitcase at the bottom of a lake. Sure, if I ever had to backstab my best friend, I needed to have enough shit on his family to play my cards. I never thought of us as psychopaths, just the privileged brats other kids secretly hated. We were a group of 17-year-olds, born with a silver spoon in our mouths. I thought the only ones capable of murder were our parents. That was until a 50-page Google Doc landed in my inbox during math class. Opening it, the doc contained dirt on everyone in the class, their dirty laundry, and darkest secrets right there in size 11 Calibri font. Lucas Warner, the mayor's son, had already been accepted into an Ivy League, thanks to a generous donation by the mayor himself. Emma Klein, class president, was selling herself to older men. Alex Castor, valedictorian, had suffocated his little brother to death for getting better test scores, and his family had covered it up. Kyan Hardy had the longest list under his perfectly made-up name. The list did not surprise me. After all, there was a reason why I followed that fucking cockroach around. Assault, battery, murder. His victims were his stepmother and stepsister, neither of whom were public knowledge. His father had an affair, and Kyan killed the two of them for trying to become part of the family. Their deaths were covered up. But there was a video revealing everything in wonderfully filthy detail. I got shivers. My lips were already curling into smile, ripples of pleasure sending me into ecstasy. I didn't need to dig around his family, I thought, my hands tightening around my phone, because all of it was here. Kyan's red slicked hands, his wide grin when he slammed a glass paperweight into his mother's head. When his sister tried to run, he grabbed the back of her neck, dragged her back, and smashed rose quartz into her temple. Behind me, Emma Klein threw her MacBook against the wall with a shriek. What the fuck? I wanted to laugh, giggles already threatening in appearance. I scrolled further down, expecting more names, more scandalous secrets. There was a name at the very bottom. When I saw it, something sour crept up my throat. Wendy Atlas. There was a picture of me, a selfie taken straight off of my Instagram. I had meticulously scanned every inch to make sure it was perfect. I was smiling, my dark hair pulled into a ponytail, my signature red ribbon tied into a bow. I wore red on Wednesdays, always. It was part of my obsession to constantly be wearing the color of my own blood. Wendy Atlas is living a lie. My first reaction was to delete the document, but I couldn't. I couldn't just press a button, it wasn't mine to delete. I wasn't even watching the attached video, and my trembling hands were already stabbing at my laptop's tracking pad trying to delete it from existence. I had to keep a poker face. Wendy Atlas did not care about what people thought of her, except my carefully molded facade was splintering piece by piece the longer I stared at the Google Doc, not just detailing my lies, but also exposing them in HD on every screen. There I was, caught in gritty camera footage standing in a dumpster full of shit, my filthy hands wrapped around a Gucci Diana mini. I was grinning, and I could see the greed on my face, my wide eyes glued to the bag. I sacrificed everything, even the relationship with my father, to maintain my lie. I came from dirt. My father never worked, and we barely scraped by on government handouts. Our apartment stunk of rot, and my room didn't have a carpet. I used to pick lice from my hair because Dad refused to run the hot water. I did everything to become a perfectly made-up lie. I cleaned rich people's houses, trying on their wardrobe, snapping pictures of myself. It was for self-validation at first. Then it became an obsession. I wanted these clothes, these material things, so much it hurt. Kyan could throw away a $5,000 watch because it didn't match his designer blazer. I dug in the trash and pulled it out, making it mine. The Google Doc exposed everything. My cleaning job, stealing clothes, and dumpster diving for high-end fashion. There were grainy pictures of my real apartment, my bedroom covered in filth, my father staring dazedly at a television that wasn't even on. They even knew about my mother's death, throwing herself off of a bridge when I was 6 years old. But I think the worst part was the collection of images of me when I was at my worst. Inside the convenience store, baggy jeans and a vomit-colored sweater, my hair in my face. I was buying $1 ramen. I felt exposed, almost naked. I could already hear their snorts of laughter. The door opened and a man appeared, dropping a large bag in front of us. I already knew what was inside. The Google Doc said one thing at the bottom, and those words were still in my head, motivating me forward, my lips splitting into my usual Wendy Atlas grin. I could fix this. I could maintain my reputation and remain number one. The only one who has seen this is you. Daddy used to say he had killed people for hurting his family. Bad people used to come to the door and ask for cash, and he would get rid of them. Before he lost his mind, Daddy told me I would never be like him. He made me promise I would grow up to be better than him. I never thought I would be capable of truly hurting someone until the reality of the situation slammed into me. Lucas Warner was digging inside the bag and grabbing a gun, swinging it towards us, his eyes wild. He would kill to hide his secrets. It's not like I blamed him. I would do anything to keep that disgusting part of me hidden. 15 people knew about my apartment, my father, dumpster diving and shit. So, ignoring the principal's son blowing Lena Carson's brains out, I followed the others, reaching into the bag and scrambling for a weapon. Jake Taylor, who was almost guaranteed to be signed to a major music label, pulled out a machete, and without a word, swung the blade into Liam J's head. I didn't scream when Liam's blood spattered my face, stumbling back, my fingers around the blade. Not the best weapon, but it was either a knife or a grenade. I didn't know how to use grenades, and I had a shitty aim. I think we all had the same idea, the same desperation. I watched my classmates scatter, some of them diving under desks, while others went straight for the kill. Emma Klein grabbed me by the throat and shoved me into the wall, teasing the blade of an axe across my throat. The teeth rolled over my skin, and she let out a loud laugh. I knew you were fucking poor. Emma's smug grin snapped something inside of me. The bitch called me poor. She knew about my apartment, about my father's breakdown, and the lengths I had taken to get what I wanted. Emma thought she was untouchable. She thought her mommy and daddy could get her out of everything. So I split her skull open. It was easier than I thought. A single plunge into the back of her head, and then forcing the knife deeper. Emma's blood felt good dripping down my face. I had half a mind to rip off her Gucci skirt, the one I really wanted, but before I could, I found myself being shoved to the ground. Warren Mears. He tried to strangle me, his fingers cinching around my throat. He would have killed me if someone's knife didn't impale him straight through his skull. I stopped coherently thinking after that. Crawling across the floor, all I could see were 15 pairs of eyes watching me digging in dumpster trash. Blood spattered the walls, pooling down my face. I was covered in it, but I didn't care. I stamped on Allie Castor's head, driving my heel into her skull. I sliced Becca Marie's throat before she could utter the word poor. Warm red slicked my hands, my vision blurring. I didn't stop, forcing my knife into bodies still moving, still screaming. Pain, mercy, or frustration, I couldn't tell. 2 of us left. The room was quiet, and I was panting, swiping my knife on my dress. Lucas Warner was perched on a desk, his legs dangling. He caught my eye, lips curling into a smile. The bastard opened his mouth, but I was already moving across the room. He had a gun, but judging from the way he was playing with it like a toy, I was sure he was out of ammo. Clearly, he thought he had the advantage. When I stabbed at him, he just slid across the desk. Brave, he murmured. Are you sure you want to do that to someone like me? He was doing it again, looking down on me even when I had a knife to his throat. The bastard looked down on me even when I wore designer clothes. When I stood on top of the social hierarchy, he still regarded me like dirt, refusing to even look at me in the hallways and casting his gaze to the ground when I happened to catch his eye. I caught him off guard when he was gearing up for an attack. His hands came to wrap around my throat, but I was already knocking him to the floor. He chuckled, rivulets of red already beating down his chin. Luke was already hurt. I glimpsed the red stain on his shirt, pressing weight onto his wound. He screamed, but it was more of a laugh. Luke spluttered deep red, giggling. You dumpster dive, he snorted. Wendy Atlas, inclining his head, his venomous eyes drank me in, as if for the first time. The same Wendy who forced a girl to kill herself last year for wearing thrifted clothes. Luke barked out a laugh, and shivers crept down my spine. I lost my grip on my knife. You're fucking poor. I found myself responding in an attempt to defend myself. That wasn't me. Luke raised a brow, laughing manically through blood splatters. Oh, now you're denying it. That's rich. You wanted to fake it, huh? Well, here's the thing, babe. You don't belong with us. He spat blood in my face. Get your disgusting welfare hands off of me. His words shouldn't have felt like knives stabbing into my spine, enough to send me lurching back. I still had the advantage, but he was the one laughing. Pressing pressure on the blade, I traced the flesh over his Adam's apple. I needed to carve my lie directly from his throat. Do it, Luke whispered, his lips curled with spite. Fake bitch, his eyes teased me. You could have just asked for like $5. You know I give to charity, sweetheart. I couldn't resist a screech, stabbing the blade into his throat. Suddenly, I craved his insults so I could rip out his voice box. Attention, the intercom announced. For a moment, the world around me contorted. The 2 of us jerked, like something was pulling our puppet strings. Luke's gaze met mine for the fraction of a second, his lips mouthing the exact same words clanging in my mind. Intercom, Project Mackerel has now ended. Lower your weapons. You have been participating in a test by the United States government in an attempt to locate and train future field agents. A sudden sharp screech in my ears sent me toppling off of the boy. I thought it was an alarm, but Luke Warner, sad screaming too, teeth clenched, his hands slamming over his ears. The sound stopped. Just like that, Luke blinked rapidly. His expression changed from manic glee to confusion and then to pain. His hands went to his throat, but I was already straddling him again, shaking the mechanical screech trying to claw into my mind. Luke surprised me with a sharp hiss, his frightened eyes finding mine. Mara. I couldn't hear him. His real voice whipped away. I could only hear his earlier words haunting me. Disgusting welfare hands. Mara, Luke whispered, his voice different. He struggled to get up, hissing in pain. Mara, what's happening? I didn't listen, plunging the knife into the bastard's throat. Warm wet redness spattered my cheeks, and I laughed this time. I watched his eyes roll back, then turn glassy, his body going limp. I was still laughing when my vision blurred. Mara, the intercom screeched. I said lower your weapon right now. No, the bastard called me poor. Luke knew about my past. He knew I was a welfare kid. The bastard would take pleasure in telling Kyan. So I kept going, singing over the orders for me to stop. I stabbed, sliced, and ripped onto him, ignoring glistening innards. But even when he was dead, even with his body reduced to scarlet mush, I could see the reflection of the Google Doc in his glassy eyes. Oh God, I could still see it. I could see myself burying myself in shit, fishing for high-end fashion. I could see my desperate grin, my fingers gripped around the Diana Mini. A frustrated cry escaped my lips. I plunged a knife into his eye, scooping it out with my fingers and squeezing it between my fists. I stabbed and severed his tongue just to make sure, pulling the slithering appendage from his lips. Again and again. Miss Michaels. The door flew open, a stampede of footsteps drowning my ears. There was a familiar murmur in my mind. A soft, soothing voice. Mara, it's me. It's okay, you can stop now. I shoved the shadow away, continuing with the knife, carving into my best friend's face. I needed all of him gone, every piece that had watched that video and seen the expose. I didn't stop until a sharp prick was slicing into my neck, and I was screaming, fear finally taking hold. Fear that had been removed to assure I would kill, along with the rest of my emotions. Reality started to contort back into shape. Lucas Warner wasn't real, and the body underneath me had a face I knew. I wasn't in a classroom at a school. I was still inside the room I had been taken to when I was kidnapped and dragged off of the bus. I wasn't wearing a Gucci mini dress and a pearl necklace. I was stuck in my old plaid shirt and best jeans. I was not Wendy Carlisle. Wendy Carlisle was the device attached to my ear. When it stopped transmitting, I was fully aware of what I had done. I had killed my best friend. His name hit me in a wave of ice-cold water, real pain beginning to thread through me, poison streaking through my blood. With the thing still attached to me, still inside my head, I still saw Lucas Warner. I couldn't see him. He was a distant and warped memory shoved away. Kaz. Once the thing was removed, I was dragged into the biting cold, screaming, my cry raw in my throat. They made me kill him. Fighting against them, I repeated the same thing until I was heaving, suffocating. You made me kill him. Kaz. I could remember parts of him, but his blood slicked my cheeks, staining my hands. There were others around me, kids covered in blood, hollow eyes enveloped in oblivion. Congratulations. That same mechanical text-to-speech voice spoke over the intercom. You have passed Project Mackerel, a government-run test to locate and train future agents in our field. It paused. Please stand up. We did, almost robotically. I could see my brother among the soldiers guarding us. He didn't even look at me. Welcome to the program, the voice said. I jumped up and I was running, stumbling. I was in the middle of nowhere, a military base in rural Virginia. I started forwards. There was a wire fence and my first thought was to climb it, but he was grabbing me, hissing in my ear. If I ran, I would die. Don't be an idiot, Connor grunted in my ear. He dragged me back to my place, shoving me back to my knees. You will spend the next 5 years training to become part of our youth program. Young people who will become our leaders, our flies on the wall in places of importance. Project Mackerel is finding the young people of tomorrow, the ones who will lead us and our great country into a proud future. I completed my training 6 months ago. I'm one of the rarities who did not lose their humanity. They're not going to give up. I'm definitely not a young person of tomorrow. I'm scared of what they're going to make me do next. I just want to go home, back to my mom, and my lie of a brother. Please help me. Are you cold? I asked Nina as we walked past the barren halls, my voice muffled through the wool scarf wrapped around my neck. The halls, which were usually filled with the chatter of passing students, now felt deathly ill as more than half of the school's population had stayed home. With the town experiencing record-breaking temperatures, it should have been a snow day. That's why it perplexed me how Nina was wearing clothes more appropriate for spring. She just shrugged. "I don't feel anything," she proudly answered. "I grew up in a country known for its freezing winters. This is nothing." I shook my head and looked toward the hallway, wincing, knowing that 2 left turns would lead me to class. Somehow, Mr. Geller never missed a day. Not even when half of the class was missing would he go easy on us. "I'm going to the bathroom," I told Nina, who was already aware of my habits. "Tell him I'm feeling sick or something." She nodded before the 2 of us disbanded. As soon as I entered the female washroom, I found a wall to lean on and closed my eyes. A few seconds were all I needed, but I couldn't even get that before my thoughts were cut through by the piercing sound of alarms, jolting me back to reality. Not soon after, the principal's weary voice boomed over the intercom. "Please stay calm and do not let anyone inside your classrooms, no matter how convincing they may be." That alone was strange, but what followed tightened a grip around my heart. "The school will be in quarantine. May God have mercy on our souls." A shuddered breath later, the speakers went quiet. For a few seconds, I couldn't begin to comprehend his words. Had I just imagined all of that? Surely, that was the only plausible explanation. Principal Dunn was the last person to ever make a joke, leaving only 2 possibilities. I had somehow misconstrued his words beyond recognition, or he was dead serious. My first thought was to text Nina to see if she had heard it, but when I heard something outside, I figured I would ask them. The moment I exited the washroom, however, the sound of someone screaming bloody murder echoed throughout the hall. From around the corner, a student dashed in a straight line. Unable to change his trajectory in time, he crashed into the lockers, the metallic clang reverberating. He barely had a chance to look at me, his arm pathetically reaching out as if he wanted help before he was impaled by the spindly, misshapen arm of a blonde wearing a cheerleader, which was now stained crimson. From how disfigured she was, I would have never assumed that was Cindy. Each limb was more malformed than the last, her head being the worst. It swayed like a pendulum, her gangling neck unable to hold the weight of her tumor-infested cranium. That was all I could make out before I instinctively closed the door that led to the washroom in an attempt to avoid the sight. It didn't work. Even though my eyes were averted, I could still hear everything. The gut-wrenching snapping sound, the wails of the kid, then silence. The hurried rhythm of my breath echoed off of the bathroom walls, prompting me to seal my mouth shut. The sound of wet shoes dragging against the floor edged closer and closer to my position until they were right outside. By the time the door was being pushed, I had already climbed atop a toilet, raising my feet so that whatever it was couldn't find me. Immediately, my nostrils flared as a pungent, foul stench invaded my nose. It took everything I had not to gag, fearing that so much as breathing too loud would result in Cindy finding me. Finally, after an agonizingly slow walk, the shambling cadaver reached the stalls. Her sneakers were now drenched with a dark red liquid, which I could have sworn was steaming from how fresh it was. A trail of blood followed her right leg, which she had to drag across the ground to move. Once she was standing in front of my stall, she stopped, turning around so that her shoes pointed toward me. At that moment, any hope of living had gone out of the window. If she just looked over the stall door, Cindy would find me, and that would be the end of it. But she didn't. She just stood there, her body not even making a single noise, not a heartbeat, nor a breath. It was like staring at a statue, her entire body unmoving, waiting for me to make the first move. When several minutes passed without anything happening, Cindy took to slamming her body against the door, the hinges creaking and threatening to come loose. I was thankful for the sudden burst of noise because if not for it, she would have heard my whimpers. Just as the nails holding the metal hinges in place were inches from popping off, she stopped and moved to the next stall like a shark looking for prey. The same process repeated for each stall until finally she concluded that no one was in there and shuffled back out of the washroom, having difficulty opening the door judging from the sound of the knob bouncing against the frame. Once the door was fully closed, I sighed, not realizing how long I had been holding my breath, until I felt my vision become blurry from the lack of oxygen. I allowed myself to take a deep breath of air, making up for the lost time, before climbing off of the toilet. My legs were shaking, and I considered simply staying here until the proper authorities came. And that's what I did. For the next hour, I spent my time tinkering with my phone. My first plan of action was to call the police, but not so much as a cycle of the dial tone could be heard before a robotic voice informed me that they couldn't take a call from my location. I tried, my phone history stacking with call after call made to 911, each attempt taken minutes apart, but each had the same outcome. When it became clear that the cops weren't coming, I opted to try my parents instead. Nothing. Figuring that other students could at least receive my messages, I wrote a barely comprehensible message to Nina about what happened, the letters typed hastily as I tried to keep my nails from clicking against the glass screen. And yet, when I pressed send, the red text underneath my block of mad rambling read, "Not delivered." At that point, my hands began shaking uncontrollably, my mind racing at the possible ways I could escape the school. With no reception and a deranged monster lurking outside, the options were few and far between. Maybe my phone was the only one failing to work, and I should just wait for someone else to come. My reasoning, appealing to both the logical part of myself and the part that couldn't even bear the thought of standing, won over, and so I waited. 2 hours passed. Every now and then, I would open my phone and try calling someone, and every time, my attempts yielded no results. Hunger and thirst began to set in, although I tried brushing them aside, since I wouldn't need to worry about starvation or dehydration for a while. After the third hour, something disrupted the mindless waiting. I couldn't tell what they were, but a glimmer of hope suggested they were bullets. Rapid, successive bangs, followed by periods of silence. It was almost -5, and be it a mixture of boredom from sitting in the same seat for hours and fear from hearing the gunfire, I couldn't take it anymore. So, with my body numb from the waist down, I stood and slowly inched open the bathroom door, just enough to see the end of the hall where the sounds had originated. Nothing. The hall was as empty as could be, and since I was in the middle of the school, there were no windows to tell me of the time, or if sirens were blaring in the distance. Cautiously, I stepped outside, looking left and right for any sign of movement. There was none, just a quiet hum from the flickering lights that sat above me. It abruptly shut off, but working electricity was the last thing on my mind. Then, something hit my head, something wet, like a leaking faucet. I tilted my head up and froze once I was met with the sight of Cindy, the white, bony blades protruding from the palms of her hands latching onto the ceiling. Her mouth, unable to be closed properly due to the obscene size of her teeth, fell open, releasing drops of viscous, crimson saliva that landed on my hair and face. Cindy's head twisted with the grace of a broken doll, her sunken pupils narrowing into pinprick lines once she spotted me. Without hesitating, she pushed herself off of the ceiling and launched herself at me, her throat producing a gurgling shriek. I jumped forward, narrowly missing her as she crashed into the ground head first, her neck snapping and twisting into a right angle. Though she was far from dead, the sudden impact must have disoriented it, because her arms and legs attempted to find footing, her wet shoes serving only to cause her stumbling form to slip and slide across the linoleum floor. I dashed down the hall before my mind could even catch up to my legs. The next right would take me to the exit, where I could finally escape from this nightmare. However, as my sneakers skidded to a halt and I prepared to continue my mad dash, the window panes surrounding the exit doors revealed darkness. At first, I thought that was because of the night sky, but then I realized the sun should have still been out at this time. That was when I realized something. It wasn't the sky, but a series of layered plated metal, blocking the windows and in turn, the door. My mind, already racing with enough questions, couldn't begin to piece together why there were barricades. They weren't there this morning, and more importantly, who put them there. Unfortunately, I had no time to think because, before I could even look to my right, I was slammed into the lockers, all the air in my lungs leaving me. My side burned with a deep gash, and as my head weakly lifted itself, I realized it was Cindy's doing. The blade jutting out of her palms, more dull than sharp, was coated with a layer of my blood. As I stumbled back, using the lockers as a support, the wound throbbed. Blood trickled out of the cut and through my clothes, soaking them in a shade of red. My legs gave out, dropping me to the floor, and I could only have slammed my eyes shut and hoped that my death would be a quick one. But instead of the thing's contorted vocal cords releasing yet another screech, my eyes were pierced by a series of thunderous booms. Not because she targeted a non-lethal area, but because the monster never had a chance to attack at all. I was always told guns were loud, but hearing the cacophony of hot metal tearing through the air was a whole new experience. The sound of a single gunshot was enough to pierce my eardrums, thankfully sparing me from having to withstand the rest of the storm. Cindy's body, which was already corrupted beyond repair, was now nothing more than a bullet-ridden rag doll, the only thing keeping it standing being a pair of twitching, malformed legs. The shells struck the lockers right above me, and I put my hands over my head to shield myself from the metal debris that rained down on me. A mixture of blood, pus, and an unknown liquid I couldn't hazard a guess on sprayed out from the emerging holes. A particularly accurate bullet pierced her thread-thin neck, and the skin, unable to support the weight of her skull, snapped. Her head dropped to the floor, surprisingly brittle, a crack formed along the side, and I could see the flesh drooping down as a result of gravity. The rest of her body followed, and I could see it still twitching. Cindy, God, she didn't deserve this. No one did. I turned her head away so that those lifeless eyes weren't staring straight at me and wiped the balmy, black liquid that covered my clothes. After all, I couldn't waste time grieving when someone had just saved my life. I finally looked up, and hope immediately rose as I saw a man, armed with a rifle, covered in matte black armor. His visor was down, making it impossible to discern any details, but he was a human, and that's all that mattered. On his chest wasn't the initials SWAT or anything remotely familiar. No, instead, there was a series of letters I'd never seen. MCRC. Of course, I couldn't care less about what division of the military he worked for. He had just saved me, and he would hopefully get me out of here. So, as soon as I could, I lifted myself to my feet, my legs still wobbly, but I managed to stay upright. The wound caused me to falter back onto my knees, the blunt damage having more of an effect than the gash itself. That, unannounced to me at that time, was a miracle because as I regained my footing, a boy ran out of the washroom, located in the hallway the soldier was standing in. "Oh, thank God," he exclaimed, relief washing over him once he saw the soldier. The boy took another breath of air to continue speaking, but before he could, the man, who was now facing the student, raised his rifle. It was so sudden, so quick, I couldn't begin to react. The ringing in my ear, which had just begun to die out, returned once another hail of scorching lead rained down on the kid. He should have been dead at the first or second bullet rupturing his skull, but the soldier only continued to hold the trigger down, even long after the boy slumped against the wall in a mess of steaming meat. As if that wasn't enough, he dropped the magazine onto the ground before loading a new one into the rifle and repeating the process. By the time he was finished reducing the boy into nothing short of a fine paste, he returned his attention to me and Cindy. I was already on my feet, pushing through the aching pain as my legs carried me as far away as possible. If the exits weren't an option, my only choice was getting to my classroom, which was where the other divergence in the hallway where the boy died led to. As I stumbled through the halls, I could make out a chorus of screams in the classrooms, which were silenced by a series of deafening bangs. They only served as reminders for the man behind me who had taken to making sure Cindy was dead. The one time I looked back, I saw him casually pointing his firearm at the corpse of the girl, not troubled by the urgency the situation called for. It didn't take long for him to notice me, the clapping of my shoes against the floor echoing through the hallway. Once he did, however, the man didn't break into a sprint or aim his rifle. He just began walking, like a predator exhausting its prey's stamina before finishing it off. Eventually, I reached the classroom, and Nina must have heard me from inside because she slipped through the door, making sure not to make noise. At the time, my consciousness was already fading in and out, and seeing my best friend alive and well was enough to cause the dam to break. My breathing grew erratic, and my chest felt tight. When I got into the range of her arms, she wrapped them around me without a word. Though I needed her support, we couldn't afford to stay in place for too long. "Nina, we have to go inside," I choked out, only realizing now that blood was clogging my throat. Nina's grip, however, didn't loosen, and she pulled me closer. "There are people. I thought they were coming to save us, but..." My words trailed off as the door to the class slowly opened with a drawn-out creak. My heart stopped as the first puddle of blood made itself known, followed by the mutilated corpses of the students. They were clumped together, making a nest of red, barely recognizable. Not a single one was alive, none except Nina. I tried pushing against her, and though I was already weakened from the injury, she didn't even budge. Whimpers that were meant to be her name spilled out of my mouth, but she remained silent as ever, her smile still stuck to her face. Then it stretched and stretched until the line separating her lips wrapped around her head. Several other lines followed after that, like segments of an orange, and the sound of tearing flesh and cartilage echoes from behind her face. The petals peeled back, countless teeth lining the inside of each fold. A black void that led to her throat sputtered as, from the depths of Nina's body, a long, sharp protrusion emerged. Like a serpent, her tongue slithered out of her mouth, a pair of mandibles lining its sides. I was paralyzed, allowing the folds that made up the outer shell of her mouth to slowly wrap around me, like the inverse of a flower blossoming. The rows of fangs lining the inside closed in on my face, the tips piercing my cheeks. Suddenly, the now familiar sound of gunfire rang out. I had expected the bullets to pierce through my body, but the pain didn't come. Once the torrent of hot lead stopped, I turned around. Somehow, Nina's tongue managed to deflect every one of those marble-sized rounds, which only bruised the appendage. Her meal interrupted, Nina closed all but the 2 lower flaps, the lines separating them disappearing. Her eyes narrowed into thin slits and her nose flared. Gripping my arm, she tossed me against the inside of the classroom with inhuman strength before slamming the door shut. I found myself joining the pile of corpses, which was still warm from the blood leaking out. Like a bear preparing for hibernation, the creature that was once Nina hoarded her food, piling the bodies until the floor couldn't even be seen. She slammed the door shut, not even bothering to finish me off, since she knew I couldn't escape. The plates of steel that lined the windows on the exit had also been placed here, meaning that I was trapped with nowhere else to go. I pushed myself off of the ground as the sound of gunshots continued to ring outside. Searching for the closest hiding spot, my eyes landed on the closet near the teacher's desk. I sprinted towards it and shut myself in. Just as I did, the sound of something breaking through the wooden door reverberated throughout the classroom. Peering through the slits, I saw Nina stumbling in, her form crumpling under the constant, deafening fire. Unlike Cindy, however, her skin was thick enough to prevent major damage, allowing her to fight off the MCRC soldier. That advantage was soon reduced to nothing as 2 other members came in, showering her with bullets. With a final, ear-piercing screech, she collapsed. I could hear her struggling to lift herself off of the floor, the soldiers continuing to pour lead into her until her body, having endured too much, was left lifeless. The 3 men were silent for a moment, then one walked up to her, and after a few more shots, I could tell they were sure she was dead. One of them pulled what I presumed was a radio, but my hearing was still damaged, and I couldn't tell what they were talking about. While he spoke, the other 2 set their eyes on the class, targeting every potential hiding spot, every one of the desks and chairs, every object, every crack in the floor. Their gazes scanned the room. Then, the gunfire continued once more. I couldn't even fall to the floor, the size of the closet barely fitting me as is. My sobs were drowned out by the cacophony. The tallest of the soldiers, upon making sure nothing was hiding underneath the teacher's desk, turned towards the closet door. He took a few steps, aiming the muzzle right where my head would be, and I squeezed my eyes shut. Suddenly, a scream, followed by the sound of something being crunched, drew his attention. Nina had wrapped her petals around the head of the second soldier, her teeth biting through the armor, and I could hear the squelch as her teeth pierced his skin. Once she bit his head off, she turned toward the 3rd soldier and threw it at him. His visor cracked from the impact, impairing his vision, giving her enough time to force the tendril inside the corpse of the headless soldier, and using his body, aimed the rifle and fired. Though it was far from accurate, enough bullets managed to penetrate the man's helmet, and he fell. Before she could turn towards the man in front of the closet door, however, he fired a revolver shot that eviscerated the hand of his comrade, then another targeting the appendage. The worm-like tongue fell to the ground, writhing and lashing out at anything near it. The man charged toward Nina, giving me enough time to open the closet door and hide under the teacher's desk. Though there were countless holes in it, since he had already checked it, that meant he wouldn't check again. The sound of his heavy boots echoed throughout the room as the 2 battled. I peeked through the holes and found him smashing her knees, crippling her. He reached into the gaping hole, grabbed the remaining tongue, and started pulling it out. The creature howled, attempting to claw at his arms or use her teeth, but it was useless. Eventually, with a yank, her tongue was unearthed from her body, followed by a bubbling, black mass that hissed. The soldier dropped the appendage and stomped down on the mass, its splatter muffled by his heel. Nina's body deflated and stilled as it joined the corpses on the floor. The soldier turned towards the closet, firing the remaining rounds in his revolver straight through the metal where my head would have been. Room 402 is clear, he announced, lowering his pistol. A groan escaped his lips as he looked at his two comrades. 2 officers down. An A-23 got them. No other survivors in the room or hallway. The other line on the radio said something, though I couldn't make out what. Roger that. Moving to sweep 305 now, he responded, holstering his pistol and switching back to his rifle. Before he left, though, he looked at the pile of bodies, clearly considering whether he should do something about it. Fuck it. The fire will take care of him, he muttered before walking off, the sound of his heavy footsteps fading into the distance. The doors and windows were barricaded, making escape impossible, and what he said about a fire. They were planning to burn this school down, along with anyone trapped inside. Every time I felt enough bravery inside of me to exit the desk, I would hear footsteps passing by and the unbearable dread returned. I knew I should just walk up to one of them. It would be a fast death, but I was a coward and would rather remain passive. The wound dealt to me by Cindy hurt, but it was remarkably shallow, meaning blood loss wasn't an option. Reddit seems to be one of the only social medias that hasn't been, so I've been writing this for the past hour or so. It's 7 now, and there's no signs of the metal plates being lifted. I don't want to burn. I don't want to die. I haven't even texted my parents to let them know I love them. Please help me. Havenwood High School, room 402. Please send someone. I can start smelling smoke already. Last week, I was Rachel. Yesterday, I was Rachel. But today, I'm Astrid. I'm 24 years old, and I'm a victim of brainwashing. It's weird. With the cocktail of medication I take every day, I feel numb. But then I stare down at my wrists and see where I've carved into my own flesh with my nails and smashed my mirror. I've clawed at my door and there are marks on the wall where I've smashed my head into the tiles. I don't feel it or remember it, but I do see the clumsy stitches across my temple and blackened eyes, split lips and band-aids when I'm cleaning my teeth. According to Dr. Chase, I'm one of the worst cases inside this facility. I didn't know until yesterday that this place had Wi-Fi. Harvey leaned over in his chair during quiet time and scribbled it on his whiteboard. He's the only one allowed a whiteboard. Unlike me, who chooses not to speak, he physically can't. If he does, bad things happen. Harvey's been using the internet to play League of Legends. He's tried to describe the lore through scribbles and bad drawings, but I still don't understand it. I have my own personal laptop to write down my thoughts, though I thought the internet was blocked. There's an outdated web browser, but it works. Harvey playing games is surprising, but it's healthier than what he's usually doing. I've been encouraged to tell my experience on paper because I refuse to talk. Between you and me, though, it's not that I'm mute like the barrage of doctors here have concluded. I just don't want to talk. I don't even know what to say. How do I talk to these professionals pretending to care? They're not subtle about being more interested in the brainwashing itself than my mental state. They prod and poke me with cocked heads and wide fascinated eyes like I'm a newly discovered pathogen. I'm surprised they haven't dissected me. Now, Astrid, we just want to help you. They croon, prickly fingers lingering a little too long on the back of my head. They want to shave my head again for more tests, but I've almost grown it to my shoulders. I'm not staying long enough here for them to shave my head again. I won't let them. We just want to take samples, they say, which is a huge contradiction of their own words. Last week, we were told we could go home, but like I said, that's not looking likely. I blame it on the boys who can't get a fucking hold of themselves. They use whiteboards for weapons and markers as makeshift knives. I admit our collective mental state isn't great, but I feel well in myself. I can't remember a lot about myself. I had to be told my name, and I don't know if I have family out there. There are splinters, like jigsaw pieces coming together. I have a sister, though I can't remember her face. I can finally think straight, and I've stopped trying to poke my eyes out. Nights are a lot better these days when I'm taking my medication. Days have color, and I'm getting better with being separated from the others. It's still hard being away from them, but I just count the days, minutes, hours, and seconds. 22 hours, 4 minutes, 53 3 seconds. Every minute, the clock ticks down in my head, counting down to when I can see my friends. Dr. Chase told us in group therapy that we're a unique set of patients. I don't think he knows what to call us. Officially, this facility is supposed to heal neurological trauma and brainwashing, but according to several private conversations I've overheard, the 4 of us are the first actual victims of brainwashing. I'm not talking drug-induced hypnosis or mental torture. We're the real deal, which means I guess we're valuable. What scares me is these people whose lives are revolved around this specific technology have no idea what it is or where it came from. We care about you, Astrid, they tell me with soothing, patient tones that should calm me down. Bullshit. They want what was inside of me. Dr. Chase doesn't just want to cure me. He comes into my room in the night hours and just stands in the doorway scratching his head. Then he brings in others, dark silhouettes looming over me when they think I'm sleeping. They all dress the same, disheveled looking and kind of gorky. They all say the same thing. I've never seen anything like this before, which is concerning. They have theories, of course, but I don't think they even believe their own hypothesis. During lunchtime, I see them slip into Nicholas's room. He's considered a band red, so I'm not surprised. He's the mind they fawn over. Fuck Nicholas. I wish the asshole would come back to Earth. I thought he was okay, and then in the middle of group therapy, the idiot attacks a nurse. I was dragged away before I could really see anything, but all I had to see was the glistening red puddle on the floor, the sharp scarlet smears staining the cuffs of his clinical white pants, for me to know he in fact was not okay. He just kept going. Fuck. He wouldn't stop, slamming the corner of his whiteboard into the orderly's skull. The sharp splint of plastic made a surprisingly good blade. I was already being dragged, but I couldn't stop staring. The orderly wasn't moving anymore, and what was left of his head was splattered all over the floor. It reminded me of a coconut that had been cracked open. When Nicholas raised the whiteboard again, his expression completely blank, I could still see where he'd drawn a sad face in response to the question, "How are you guys feeling today?" Nicholas had been feeling sad for a while, despite showing little to no emotion. I think his mental state is keeping all of us here, and while I despise him for prolonging our seemingly endless stay here, that doesn't stop our nightly chats. I won't fully go into why I have to talk to him, and if I don't, I will fall apart. I will get into that. It's like being bound to someone, something poisonous, but I can't get him out of my head. I wouldn't say we talk, exactly. Lights out, I climb into bed and knock 3 times on my wall. We have our own code. Technically, none of us are allowed to talk directly to each other outside of therapy. Dr. Chase said communication could be detrimental to our healing. Like I said, though, it's impossible not to talk to them. So, we talk in our own way. Harvey and I talk through whiteboards, and Addie actually speaks. Rarely, because when she does start talking, Addie can't stop, her words tangling, turning into gibberish. Her eyes roll back, and she starts trembling, blood seeping from her nose. Dr. Chase explained it's a reaction to what they can't get out of her. He describes them as splinters too small to retrieve. When Addie does speak, she talks about the world we're told to forget. She talks about a life that wasn't real. Addie's had 4 different surgeries, and they still can't get them out. They are the resin behind her slurring words, and noticeable twitch, a sudden jerk of her head. Erg. The idea of tiny pieces of something just stuck in the meat of my brain makes me shudder. Nicholas and I, unlike Addie and Harvey, we use the good old-fashioned way. 1 knock on my wall is, "I can't talk tonight." 2 is, "Do you want to talk?" And 3, my most commonly used, "You're a fucking idiot." He doesn't reply anymore. Instead, he just screams. Nicholas used to reply. Before the tests began and the world slowly started to feel real again, we talked endlessly all night through knocks with our own patterns, and I was so in love. The type of love that felt endless. How can I describe love I can't even remember? How can I describe feelings that were implanted and not organic? It didn't come like a soft wave, like a first love. This was forceful, a parasite leaching into my skull, words that weren't mine twisting on my lips. I remember being apart from him. From them felt like a physical chain wrapped around me, a suffocating wave dragging me into the dark. Now it is different, however, with the medication and the tests, and then being forcefully isolated from each other. I am Astrid and Nicholas is a stranger. I am Astrid and Nicholas is the psycho in room T101. I miss the earlier days. Neither of us were on Earth at that point, and the world world was like one big carousel ride I couldn't get off of. He was always by my side, escaping his own room and slamming his hands into my door, screaming at the guards dragging me away. It was fun, like we were on an adventure, and the only bad people were the figures in white pricking our necks with sedatives and trying to pull us apart. We've already escaped once, all of us, back when I called him by a different name, back when that name was reality and everything else was a dream. Dr. Chase told me sternly that wasn't Nicholas, and he was trying to make the real Nicholas better. I should probably tell you why I'm writing this, what got me shoved in here in the first place. I knew Craigslist didn't have a great track record, but I was taking a chance on a room. I don't remember much about my living situation, but I know I wanted out. So, I was taking risks. It was a fairly innocent ad that caught my eye when I was browsing through the homepage. A modern college house in the middle of the city, free internet and a single roommate who worked nights. The room itself was kinda mediocre. Yellow wallpaper, cream carpet, and some creepy paintings stuck on the wall. But there was a great view of the college town, and I had enough space to make it my own. It was perfect. I applied while on the bus to class, adding that I was an independent person and wouldn't get in the way. Dr. Chase wants me to describe my memories as detailed as I can. I remember the fall leaves dancing across the window and glued to my shoes. There was a dusting of frost on the sidewalk outside, and the air smelled of rain. Class went by in a blur. The girl sitting next to me smelled like pumpkin spice coffee, so I went to get my own. I got a reply when the frazzled-looking worker handed me my drink. "Hey, thanks for inquiring about the room. Do you want to come check it out?" The owner sent me the address, and I ended up standing in front of a large, red door. But I wasn't alone. I noticed I was being followed halfway down the block. I crossed the road, and then so did the figure. When I twisted around, a college guy around my age was staring down at the leaves he was kicking through, nodding his head to music corked in his ears. It was the trench coat that threw me off guard. I couldn't see a face, only a shock of reddish curls catching the late afternoon sunlight. When it became clear we were heading in the same direction, he lifted his head, eyes narrowing like this was some kind of game, and I was in the lead. Then he was quickening his steps. I started power walking, both to get away from him, a stray thought pushing its way into my mind. I needed to get there first. Clearly, he was also thinking it, his expression hardening with concentration. When he was at my side, and the two of us were shooting panicked glances at each other, I walked faster. He followed. And by the time we were shoving past each other through the gate, trampling in a growing pile of leaves and practically sprinting to the door, I realized I was unknowingly fighting for the room. The guy, whose face was now visible, narrow features and wide, brown eyes, finally turned to me, slightly out of breath. The guy was cute. A mop of reddish curls and freckles. His clothes screamed English major. It wasn't my type of cute. I preferred the manly types, and this guy was kinda scrawny. Nerd cute is what I would have called him. He had slammed his hand on the door first, so I guess he'd won. Still though, I was standing like an idiot, half hoping he'd offer rock, paper, scissors. There was a prick of an awkward silence before he slowly lowered his hand from the door and then knocked. He seemed nervous, suddenly, his hands delving into his pockets and then picking at his shirt. "You're here for the room." He said it more like a statement, avoiding eye contact and bouncing up and down on his heels. This guy smelled like old books, sandalwood, and freshly brewed coffee, the embodiment of fall itself. "I am," I said, and when his lip curled in distaste, I remembered we were rivals. "I'm Astrid," I said. He nodded slowly, withholding his own. "Cool." I tried to smile, though my patience was running thin. "Do you want me to go, or?" He was supposed to say no, we can figure this out. Like a normal human, but this guy just shrugged. "If you want," he side-eyed me. "The room is mine because, I got here first." I didn't realize how much I wanted the room until he was trying to take it from me. When I applied for it, I didn't see any views, I found myself saying through gritted teeth. "So, technically, I saw it first, if we're using your logic." He didn't look at me. "Congratulations." I nodded. "Exactly, so it's as much my room as yours." The guy's head jerked like I had personally insulted him. "I inquired this morning," he said, his smile too wide. "Too many teeth. I scan the app every day. This is the best room I've seen by far, and it's overlooking the town." "Well, so do I," snapping back. I read through it on my phone. Good for you. He rolled his eyes, corking his earphones back in. Feel free to hang around, the boy deadpanned. But I wouldn't recommend it. I felt it, then, a sudden, irresistible urge to get the last word. Fine, I said, my cheeks burning. He knocked again, folding his arms. Cool, I said, my voice going higher in pitch. His lip curled into a smirk. I didn't realize I had a parrot on my shoulder. Another painful silence with me trying to think of a comeback which wasn't childish, catching his glances, the curve of his lips forming a smirk. He knew I was struggling. Before either of us could surrender, the door flew open, a bright-eyed girl poking her head through the gap. She looked younger than the two of us, maybe her first or second year of college. She was a blur of blonde curls and wide smiles, a feverish energy almost knocking me off my feet. The warm, golden light swimming around her was homely. The guy must have thought the same, his eyes momentarily entranced by the light. I saw his shoulders relax slightly, his expression loosening, but he still made a point of keeping his distance from me, like he was already a housemate, and I was a stray cat. Hi, the girl's gaze snapped to each of us, her smile growing wider. She reached out to shake my hand. Her fingers were so cold. You're Astrid, right? The girl who wants to room. I nodded, feeling smug, before she reached out to shake the guy's hand, though he high-fived her instead. Harvey, you're here for the room too. For a moment, her eyes seemed to light up. Oh, the girl laughed. She spoke straight expletives. Her energy was cute, but it was too in my face. Wait, are you guys, inquiring together? She steepled her fingers together like she was implying something else, and we shared a mutual look of what the fuck, before he laughed. Not just laughing, I'm talking spluttering, almost keeling over. No, I snapped, at the same time as the guy deadpanned. You're fucking kidding, right? No, dude, I have standards. Ouch, that one was going to sting. The owner laughed, like he was a comedic fucking genius. Well, it's nice to meet you guys. Why don't you two come on in? I'm just making iced tea. She ushered us in. Harvey stepped forward first, kicking off his shoes, and I followed hesitantly. The house was exactly what I wanted. I walked straight into rustic paintwork and a ratty welcome mat with the H missing from Home Sweet Home. Cute and endearing. Further down the hall, the place oozed warmth. The lounge was small but homey, beanbags in the place of a couch. The owner danced into the kitchen, and Harvey followed. I noticed he was drinking everything, and I mean everything in. He picked up a ceramic pig from a small table, frowning at it, then a wooden horse. Clearly, he was yet to learn basic human decency at the grand age of 20-something. We're in the kitchen, the owner trilled, when I found myself intrigued by Harvey full body scanning everything in his vicinity. The guy almost dropped the pig, his eyes widening. Harvey met my gaze. He mouthed. I don't know what was wrong with me. Maybe there was something in the air. But the second Harvey straightened up, I was already power walking toward the kitchen. He was right behind me, his socks sliding on the marble flooring in a rush to reach the room before me. I won this time, with Harvey breathing down my neck, trying to shove his way through. He had the energy of an older brother. Once I was on the threshold, however, my momentary glee at winning this silent battle with a stranger dissipated. There were two others sitting around a table, cocked heads and polite smiles that were definitely not expecting us. A ponytailed brunette caught my eye, her lip curled. She was pretty, the kind of pretty I wasn't used to, the pretty that caught my breath and made my chest ache. This girl was glowing, dressed in the designer fall fashion, a striped scarf wrapped around her neck. Sitting across from her was a mop of blonde curls peering at the two of us like we were aliens stepping from a mothership. Previously, it looked like he'd been falling asleep, fist resting on his chin. Still though, he raised his hand in a shy wave, a small crease of a smile on his lips. Ponytail wasn't as welcoming. Her cat-like eyes raked me up and down, head to toe. Another one. Clearly, neither of us knew we were there for the same room. The owner, who was clattering around making drinks, gestured us to sit down. I did, sliding into a seat. I had no idea why I was still there. There was one room and 4 of us, and I wasn't planning on losing my dignity for a cheap room in the city. I made my decision to announce I was leaving, but before I could, a glass was set in front of me. Iced tea. It looked homemade, condensation fogging up the glass. Slowly lowering myself back into my chair, I took an experimental sip. Lemons with a tinge of ginger, maybe some vodka. It tasted good, a refreshing flush down my throat. I'm Tella, by the way. The owner leaned against the counter comfortably, her hands cursing her own drink. She nodded to the other two. Addie and Zach were just telling me their majors. Harvey made a point of reluctantly dropping into his chair. He downed his drink in one gulp. English language arts, he announced, hiding a burp behind his hand. Not to be that guy, but who's getting this room? He nodded at Tella, who turned and grabbed cookies from a cupboard. There are 4 of us in one room, he said, which, by the way, is the cheapest I've ever seen. So, Harvey leaned forward. Why invite all of us? He was right, but he didn't have to be a dick about it. Tella didn't speak for a moment, flashing us a grin. Do you guys like sitcoms? The question took me off guard. I thought she said, do you guys like CD-ROMs? But then Ponytail, or Addie, was nodding, delicately sipping from her glass. Yeah, they're alright, I guess. I've seen all of the classics. They're good. They're not funny. I noticed Harvey's grip slip around the rim of his glass before he tightened his hold. The jokes are painful, and the humor tries way too. I jumped when a shattering sound hit my ears, drowning out the rest of Harvey's rant. Tella had dropped her glass, but she didn't move, her hand still in midair, fingers cinched like she was still holding it. How much? She spoke softly, her lips curving into a small smile. I noticed she was barefoot, and the crunch of her stepping into shards of glass, swaying back and forth. How much what? The blonde, Zach, finally spoke up. His accent was definitely from New York, a thick Long Island drawl in his tone. He too looked like he was ready to leave. Zach tipped sideways in his chair before I realized he was just reaching for his backpack. Tella didn't look at us. Her feet were bleeding, but her smile was stretching wide across her lips. There was something in her eyes I couldn't understand. She couldn't feel the pain of glass slicing into her flesh. Iced tea crept back up my throat in a sour paste. How much? She spaced out her words. Do you guys like sitcoms? Her emphasis on the word was like an explosion, mania and excitement collapsing into one, and my body began to catch up with my brain. I think that was the moment the 4 of us collectively realized through panicked looks that Tella was that type of person. I was the first to remember how to move. I've changed my mind, I said in a breath which tangled on my tongue. What came out instead was I've remained. I jumped up and reached the door, but my head swam, the world jolting. It looked what electroshocks feel like, the kitchen tiles and ceiling bleeding into one. I blinked rapidly. No, I was still sitting down. I hadn't moved an inch from the chair. I don't know how to describe this experience. Dr. Chase had to sedate me the first time I recalled it, because apparently I'd tried to hurt myself. He told me it was my brain's response to recalling a bad memory. When I try to say it out loud, I get jittery and I start jamming my teeth into my tongue. With the meds, all of my fear is stripped away. I can dig into the recesses of my own trauma and see it as something brighter. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or at least that's what Dr. Chase likened it to, has helped me turn what used to be a memory that put me in the quiet room for weeks, trying and failing to crack my own skull open, into a movie in my head. We were just getting high, Dr. Chase and the other doctors told me, sitting me down on crinkly paper on a bed and peering into my eyes with weird glasses. They told me to close my eyes and go over the memory again, and this time I had to replace Zach's screaming with laughing. Tella didn't spike our drinks with mind-rotting hallucinogens and sedatives. She just gave us weed. Fuck. Harvey's voice sounded like he was in a tunnel, a tangled moan rolling off his tongue. I was half aware of Zach on his hands and knees, laughing. What did you put in those? Drinks? Yeah. What did you pour in this? Harvey dragged out the S until something hit the table with a thunk. His glass, followed by his head. I remember trying to ask if he was okay before my lips were numb, my vision blurring into one singular pinprick, light slowly bleeding away. There wasn't enough time for darkness. Thunk went my head, dropping onto the table. Another thunk, and a crash. Addie, I heard her head slam into the kitchen tiles. Her body, fuck. I can't write this. Her body landed in shattered glass that I could hear Tella crunching through. So dark. I was nothing for a while, and there was nothing. Not like dreaming or sleeping or just being knocked out. It was deeper, more permanent. It felt like a choking, suffocating oblivion swallowing me up before choking me back out. When I cracked one eye open, it was light, too bright. I was standing, my body more of a puppet on strings. My clothes felt itchy and wrong and old. like I had been wearing them for weeks, months. There was something in my head, writhing in my ears. Laughter. I couldn't move my body, my expression, my lips or eyes. I was paralyzed, the world going on around me. Initially, it looked like I'd woken up in a cozy lounge. There was a couch behind me, a colorful rug, and warm, rustic wallpaper. But then I was looking past all of that, at scary silver walls of metal that went on for seemingly forever. I wasn't inside an apartment. I was on a stage. Disoriented, it took me a moment to register a figure standing in front of me. I noticed disheveled clothes first, crumpled jeans and a shirt glued to a skeletal figure. I didn't know his face. He was younger, maybe by a year or two. Whoever he was, this guy had been here longer. He was the shell of a human being, pathetic remains of what had been someone, something. Brown hair fell and wide eyes glued to me, lips parted like he was talking. I waited for him to scream, to cry out for help. His eyes told me one thing, play along. Part of me wanted to refuse, but then something wet and fleshy hit the ground in front of us, the world jolting once more. My vision started to clear and something slammed into me, a wave of ice water stealing my breath. There wasn't paint on the walls. It was too bright, too new and then old, scarlet streaks blurring together. The carpet under my bare feet was suddenly slimy and wet, pooling red seeping through my toes. Through tunnel vision, a man had been standing in front of me. With a clearer head, however, I was seeing flaws my mind had skimmed past, dark shadows under his eyes, yellowing bruises blossoming across his cheeks, a split lip, a thin trail of dried scarlet pooling down his temple. I think my brain was trying to shield what was in the corners of the room. Bodies piled on top of each other, some of them old, piles of bones, and some of them fresh, still warm. The couch behind the guy was filled with 3 figures. I recognized them, Zach, Addie, and Harvey. Neither of them moved, their heads bowed. I jumped, or at least I internally jumped, when the man standing in front of me took my hands. Wetness. His fingers were slick red, and I tried to pull away, but I couldn't. He opened his mouth, squeezing onto my fingers. I didn't think there was a relationship to fuck up. His voice was surprisingly calm, his expression twisting. It hit me that we were in the middle of an argument. In the middle of an argument that I didn't remember, but my tongue was already entangled. I backed away from him, as if my strings were being tugged, my lips curling into a scowl. I thought we were broken up. Laughter followed again, a sharp thunderclap in my skull. Pain I had never felt before, that was fucking raw and acute, struck the end of my head. I couldn't move my hands to signal that I needed help. My brain felt like it was igniting, burning. He was like me. He couldn't move, and yet somehow he was squeezing my fingers hard enough to send a message. Play along. And I did, my lips moving without me, words that weren't mine, an expression that wasn't mine. I was the backseat passenger inside my own body. We said we weren't going to see other people. Immediately, he was following along, a natural, somehow. Well, how was I supposed to know? I'm not a psychic. If I was, I'd be like $10 billion richer. He paused. More laughter. I mean, we would be, $10 million richer. The words were pushing through my mouth, forceful. Don't think you can sweet talk me with $10 million. Billion, he corrected, his lips curling into a smirk. What? I can't help being smart. I hit him with the newspaper suddenly in my hand. You, smart. A snort from the couch. Harvey, just please, he paused. Be kind to the furniture when you're fighting. His voice choked up, laughter following. It's innocent, I tell you, innocent. The laughing didn't stop, louder, rooted inside my skull. My words tasted like blood. I could feel it seeping down my nose and chin. There were bugs crawling in my head. I could feel them, sense them sinking their tiny claws into the meat of my brain, pouring from my ears and sticking to my neck. Their chitter both inside my head and in the room, writhing on the walls, feasting on fleshy remains. They sunk into my thoughts, once again turning them into cotton candy, plunging me into uncertain oblivion. I spat blood through words that suddenly didn't make sense. My legs buckled. The conversation went on while I was being violently pulled back inside my mind. Rachel, the electric pinpricks in my head played with my thoughts. No, I fought back. Astrid, consciousness came in waves. Sometimes I was standing with the nameless man, and others I was with Zach or Harvey and Addie. After a while of suffocating on nothing, I used these momentary bursts of clarity to be thankful for those around me. My hair grew long, almost to my knees, until Tella cut it all off, scrubbing the blood off of my face and making me all better. I can't remember when we lost Zach. One minute, the two of us were talking, and the next, I could see them, tiny, skittering bugs pouring from his mouth and eyes, his body coming apart in front of me. I didn't react when a chunk of him hit me in the cheek. I couldn't react. I hadn't spoken my own words in months, and when I tried to, my tongue was seized from me. When Tella cleaned away Zach and spread the rest of him over the walls for the feast, I started calling myself a different name. I was Rachel. The bugs eating me from the inside told me I was called Rachel. If I fought back, they made me wish I was dead. They made me slam my head into the ground, trying to cave my own skull in. I remember there was a moment of coherency after we lost Zach, and before we gave into our new lives. It was rare for all of us to be awake at the same time. Sometimes the bugs inside our brains went to sleep, leaving us conscious and aware for hours at a time, and keeping the facade became progressively harder. Addie found the exit door by accident. She said we were in a bunker locked with a biometric scanner. Harvey found a weapon, a lead pipe. We timed it perfectly. Tella went to get food for exactly 45 minutes every single day, so Harvey planned to bash her fucking brains in. He hypothesized that she was controlling the bugs somehow, and without Tella, there would be no bugs. I wish he was right, because then we would have only spent a year in captivity. What Harvey wasn't planning on was these things having sentience. They wanted the act to continue, and even with Tella gone for a moment, they wanted to be entertained. So they entertained themselves. That was the day we lost Harvey too. He didn't splatter in my face like Zach, a warm, wet streak on my cheeks. Instead of attacking Tella, he slammed the pipe into his own head again and again until he was dropping to his knees, blood pouring from his nose, begging for mercy. Tella did give us mercy. She stopped us from thinking for a while, and slowly my name started to fade away. Rachel. I snapped awake halfway through a conversation. Zach's body had toppled onto its side, still leaning against the wall, a casual viewer. Harvey had facial hair, his hair grown out. There was a smile stretched across his lips. Harvey called me Rachel, so I called him the name skittering in my mind, trying to break from my lips. Danny. I refused to surrender until that moment, because calling him that, it felt natural and I knew all of him. After all, he was my friend. More darkness, and I stopped thinking again. All I could sense was the sharp chitter in my skull. Light. Addie and I were sitting on the couch watching TV. She had a bowl of popcorn. I could see Zach's in the corner of my vision. Maggots had gotten into his eyes. Addie's gaze was on the TV screen that wasn't on. Her name was Elodie. She handed me a chip, her words light and whimsical, almost like we were dreaming. Chip. She offered me another, raucous laughter rattling my head. I got a boyfriend soon after, the man who I was always talking to, sleeping with, my arms wrapped around him. Even as a backseat passenger, I still felt like my heart was fluttering, my chest aching. He felt natural next to me, and over the years of blinking back awake, the two of us stopped fighting it. His eyes had almost become animated over the years. He was always smiling, laughing, blood spilling from his lips. That became normal. I had friends and a boyfriend living in a huge apartment, a group of 20-somethings living together as a group. As friends, what more could I ask for? Days passed after that. Weeks, months, years. Light flooded inside the bunker when we were playing charades. Light felt more suffocating than the dark. It pierced my eyes, sending me to my knees, cutting our game short. I was sitting with arms wrapped around my boyfriend when sudden thundering voices sounded, and the laughter inside my head started to falter. There and here, before I knew what was happening, our tiny piece of heaven was being destroyed. Figures appeared with heavy weapons, pale light flashing in our eyes. In the startling allure, my body became free for a moment. I caught Addie blinking rapidly and Harvey frowning down at his red slicked hands. The walls around us were painted, stained, and human remains. And so were we. A woman came over to me. Her eyes were wide, scared. Zach wasn't there anymore, a pile of bones on the floor. Astrid. She spoke calmly, calling for medics. All around me, my friends were being checked over. Harvey stumbled away from the figures, his eyes wide in the bright allure. No, he choked out in a laugh. No, we're fine. Can you please get out of our house? He gestured to the door that had been blown through. Now, that is going to be our day job tomorrow. Laughter sounded in my head, so I ignored the woman throwing a blanket over me, the words spewing from my lips before I could stop them. You mean it's going to be your day job? Astrid. The woman slapped me, and some lost color bled back to reality. Astrid, can you hear me? I am so sorry, sweetie, but you're in shock, okay? I'm going to help you. I promise. Her words collapsed into white noise when Addie started screaming, and Harvey was dragged away from her. I reached out for my boyfriend's hand, but he was kneeling on the floor. A man was shining a light in his flickering eyes. Nicholas. He spoke softly, and my boyfriend only cocked his head, frowning. Nick, can you tell me how many fingers I'm holding up? Please. His gaze found mine. It's okay, I told him, panic twisting my gut. It's okay, baby. Tell them, and maybe they'll go away. He did, through a spluttered laugh. 5. Now, can you go away now, please? Geez, it's a Friday night, man. The man checking him over let out a hiss before lifting his head. Get away from them, he snapped, and the other figures backed away slowly. He looked scared, shaken. Can we get someone else in here? He started picking dead bugs off of my boyfriend's neck with tweezers. I don't think we're qualified to deal with this. That was when my world started to come apart. My boyfriend was dragged away, and a hysterical Harvey attacked the woman trying to help him. I heard her scream, but before I could see what was happening, a cruel, cold prick slid into the back of my neck. I didn't realize I was screaming too until I was being gently brought to my knees, trembling, sobbing into the ground. I was sinking into the abyss when footsteps sounded. A figure was looming over me, and my lips were numb. Help. I needed help. I needed my friends. What have we got? A male voice crept into my mind when I was falling. 6 kidnapped students that went missing in 2020, a female voice said. 4 are heavily inebriated. 1 turned herself in, and Zach Cartwright is confirmed deceased. No traces of drugs or alcohol. There's nothing but bugs. I've never seen anything like it. These things are part organic, but Astrid. I didn't respond, my eyes flickering. I felt my body swaying back and forth. Rachel. I jerked my head in time to the voice, reality bleeding back into fruition. Time had skipped forward. I was sitting in a white room, my legs swinging off of a bed. My hair was gone. A smiling woman was in front of me. She detailed the basics. I was quarantined inside a facility for victims of brainwashing. When I jumped off of the bed and tried to get out, the nurse calmly led me back onto the bed. When she was less gentle, strapping me down, the nurse told me I was going to be in a lot of pain. But it was for the best. She said there was pain, but I don't remember it. Even if my body does, I still have scorch marks in the backs of my eyes. I was weak, my body limp, barf dripping down my chin when the nurse gently took my hands. Astrid, she ignored my correction. Would you like to see what has influenced this type of behavior? The nurse cleared her throat. We don't exactly know what it is. What we do know is that it attached itself to your spinal cord, feeding you information. Her lips formed a frown, which has influenced you into thinking certain things. Your name, for example. She held out a small silver instrument, and attached to it was a writhing thing struggling to keep hold. Astrid, you were a prisoner for 3 years, and this is the result of your current mental state. We are going to help you, but you have to let us. Her gaze dropped to the ground, which would require a certain surgery to remove this infestation. No, I shook my head. I want to see my friends. Astrid, that won't be possible right now. Instead of speaking, I clawed at her face and screamed, demanded to be reunited with my friends. It hurt being away from them. When I tried to explain it, I received sympathetic smiles. But then I had the surgery, and the invisible ribbon binding us together was cruelly severed. I started therapy on my own, and then with them. The others didn't talk. When Addie spoke, she suffered seizures. Harvey preferred using a whiteboard, and Nicholas didn't even acknowledge us until he grew violent. Dr. Chase thinks the things have laid eggs inside his mind and are still in control. 3 nights ago, I awoke inside the bunker that had held me captive. With me were Harvey, Addie, and Nicholas. Zach was there too. In front of us was a picnic blanket filled with food and drinks, and we laughed and talked like we were still inside our little heaven. Nicholas wrapped his arms around me, and I nestled my head in his lap. He was smiling again. The walls around us were chittering, moving, calling. They want the show to continue. I thought it was a dream, but my feet were caked in dirt from walking around barefoot. At breakfast the morning after, Harvey grabbed my hand and pulled me into the bathroom. He scribbled something on his whiteboard. Did you? Last night. What was that? I could only nod, breathless. He wrote another message, this time in bubble letters. Lights out. We go looking for that bitch. He'd drawn an angry face next to it, and I smiled. I hadn't smiled in a while. Tella, our kidnapper, is inside the facility with us. She too is receiving a different kind of treatment. So, per what Harvey said, we planned to meet after lights out, but he never showed up. This morning, a nurse informed me there was an incident during his surgery and I won't be able to see him anymore. Dr. Chase said Harvey is in a very bad state. Nicholas and Addie are deteriorating, but I can still see them. When I go to sleep, I awaken inside our apartment and the laughter is back. The chittering in my skull grows louder, our little piece of heaven, but then I wake up and he's not at breakfast. Addie is missing too, and the screams inside Nicholas's room terrify me. Please, can someone get us out of here? I just want to see my friends. 19 hours, 34 minutes, 308 seconds. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.